The Lord called to Moses from the tabernacle and said to him, "Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. When you present an animal as an offering to the Lord, you may take it from your herd of cattle or your flock of sheep and goats. If the animal you present as a burnt offering is from the herd, it must be a male with no defects. Bring it to the entrance of the tabernacle so you may be accepted by the Lord. Lay your hand on the animal's head, and the Lord will accept its death in your place to purify you, making you right with him. Then slaughter the young bull in the Lord's presence, and Aaron's sons, the priests, will present the animal's blood by splattering it against all sides of the altar that stands at the entrance to the tabernacle. Then skin the animal and cut it into pieces. The sons of Aaron the priest will build a wood fire on the altar. They will arrange the pieces of the offering, including the head and fat, on the wood burning on the altar. But the internal organs and the legs must first be washed with water. Then the priest will burn the entire sacrifice on the altar as a burnt offering. It is a special gift, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. If the animal you present as a burnt offering is from the flock, it may be either a sheep or a goat, but it must be a male with no defects. Slaughter the animal on the north side of the altar in the Lord's presence, and Aaron's sons, the priests, will splatter its blood against all sides of the altar. Then cut the animal in pieces, and the priests will arrange the pieces of the offering, including the head and fat, on the wood burning on the altar. But the internal organs and the legs must first be washed with water. Then the priest will burn the entire sacrifice on the altar as a burnt offering. It is a special gift, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. If you present a bird as a burnt offering to the Lord, choose either a.
When you present grain as an offering to the Lord, the offering must consist of choice flour. You are to pour olive oil on it, sprinkle it with frankincense, and bring it to Aaron's sons, the priests. The priest will scoop out a handful of the flour moistened with oil, together with all the frankincense, and burn this representative portion on the altar. It is a special gift, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. The rest of the grain offering will then be given to Aaron and his sons. This offering will be considered a most holy part of the special gifts presented to the Lord. If your offering is a grain offering baked in an oven, it must be made of choice flour, but without any yeast. It may be presented in the form of thin cakes mixed with olive oil or wafers spread with olive oil. If your grain offering is cooked on a griddle, it must be made of choice flour mixed with olive oil but without any yeast. Break it in pieces and pour olive oil on it. It is a grain offering. If your grain offering is prepared in a pan, it must be made of choice flour and olive oil. No matter how a grain offering for the Lord has been prepared, bring it to the priest who will present it at the altar. The priest will take a representative portion of the grain offering and burn it on the altar. It is a special gift, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. The rest of the grain offering will then be given to Aaron and his sons as their food. This offering will be considered a most holy part of the special gifts presented to the Lord. Do not use yeast in preparing any of the grain offerings you present to the Lord, because no yeast or honey may be burned as a special gift presented to the Lord. You may add yeast and honey to an offering of the first crops of your harvest, but these must never be offered on the altar as a pleasing aroma to the Lord. Season all your grain offerings with salt to remind you of God's eternal covenant. Never forget to add salt to your grain offerings. If you present a grain offering to the Lord from the first portion of your harvest, bring fresh grain that is coarsely ground and roasted on a fire. Put olive oil on this grain offering and sprinkle it with frankincense. The priest will take a representative portion of the grain moistened with oil, together with all the frankincense, and burn it as a special gift presented to the Lord.
If you present an animal from the herd as a peace offering to the Lord, it may be a male or a female, but it must have no defects. Lay your hand on the animal's head and slaughter it at the entrance of the tabernacle. Then Aaron's sons, the priests, will splatter its blood against all sides of the altar. The priest must present part of this peace offering as a special gift to the Lord. This includes all the fat around the internal organs, the 2 kidneys, and the fat around them near the loins, and the long lobe of the liver. These must be removed with the kidneys, and Aaron's sons will burn them on top of the burnt offering on the wood, burning on the altar. It is a special gift, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. If you present an animal from the flock as a peace offering to the Lord, it may be a male or a female, but it must have no defects. If you present a sheep as your offering, bring it to the Lord, lay your hand on its head, and slaughter it in front of the tabernacle. Aaron's sons will then splatter the sheep's blood against all sides of the altar. The priest must present the fat of this peace offering as a special gift to the Lord. This includes the fat of the broad tail cut off near the backbone, all the fat around the internal organs, the 2 kidneys and the fat around them near the loins, and the long lobe of the liver. These must be removed with the kidneys, and the priest will burn them on the altar. It is a special gift of food presented to the Lord. Of food. If you present a goat as your offering, bring it to the Lord, lay your hand on its head, and slaughter it in front of the tabernacle. Aaron's sons will then splatter the goat's blood against all sides of the altar. The priest must present part of this offering as a special gift to the Lord. This includes all the fat around the internal organs, the 2 kidneys, and the fat around them near the loins, and the long lobe of the liver. These must be removed with the kidneys, and the priest will burn them on the altar. It is a special gift of food, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. All the fat belongs to the Lord. You must never eat any fat or blood. This is a permanent law for you, and it must be observed from generation to generation wherever you live.
Then the Lord said to Moses, "Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. This is how you are to deal with those who sin unintentionally by doing anything that violates one of the Lord's commands. If the high priest sins, bringing guilt upon the entire community, he must give a sin offering for the sin he has committed. He must present to the Lord a young bull with no defects. He must bring the bull to the Lord at the entrance of the tabernacle, lay his hand on the bull's head, and slaughter it before the Lord. The high priest will then take some of the bull's blood into the tabernacle, dip his finger in the blood, and sprinkle it 7 times before the Lord in front of the inner curtain of the sanctuary. The priest will then put some of the blood on the horns of the altar for fragrant incense that stands in the Lord's presence inside the tabernacle. He will pour out the rest of the bull's blood at the base of the altar for burnt offerings at the entrance of the tabernacle. Then the priest must remove all the fat of the bull to be offered as a sin offering. This includes all the fat around the internal organs, the 2 kidneys, and the fat around them near the loins, and the long lobe of the liver. He must remove these along with the kidneys, just as he does with cattle offered as a peace offering, and burn them on the altar of burnt offerings. But he must take whatever is left of the bull, its hide, meat, head, legs, internal organs, and dung, and carry it away to a place outside the camp that is ceremonially clean, the place where the ashes are dumped. There, on the ash heap, he will burn it on a wood fire. If the entire Israelite community sins by violating one of the Lord's commands, but the people don't realize it, they are still guilty. When they become aware of their sin, the people must bring a young bull as an offering for their sin and present it before the tabernacle. The elders of the community must then lay their hands on the bull's head and slaughter it before the Lord. The high priest will then take some of the bull's blood into the tabernacle, dip his finger in the blood, and sprinkle it 7 times before the Lord in front of the inner curtain. He will then put some of the blood on the horns of the altar for fragrant incense that stands in the Lord's presence inside the tabernacle. He will pour out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar for burnt offerings at the entrance of the tabernacle. Then the priest must remove all the animal's fat and burn it on the altar, just as he does with the bull offered as a sin offering for the high priest. Through this process, the priest will purify the people, making them right with the Lord, and they will be forgiven. Then the priest must take what is left of the bull and carry it outside the camp and burn it there, just as is done with the sin offering for the high priest. This offering is for the sin of the entire congregation of Israel.
If one of Israel's leaders sins by violating one of the commands of the Lord his God, but doesn't realize it, he is still guilty. When he becomes aware of his sin, he must bring as his offering a male goat with no defects. He must lay his hand on the goat's head and slaughter it at the place where burnt offerings are slaughtered before the Lord. This is an offering for his sin. Then the priest will dip his finger in the blood of the sin offering and put it on the horns of the altar for burnt offerings. He will pour out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. Then he must burn all the goat's fat on the altar, just as he does with the peace offering. Through this process, the priest will purify the leader from his sin, making him right with the Lord, and he will be forgiven. If any of the common people sin by violating one of the Lord's commands, but they don't realize it, they are still guilty. When they become aware of their sin, they must bring as an offering for their sin a female goat with no defects. They must lay a hand on the head of the sin offering and slaughter it at the place where burnt offerings are slaughtered. Then the priest will dip his finger in the blood and put it on the horns of the altar for burnt offerings. He will pour out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. Then he must remove all the goat's fat, just as he does with the fat of the peace offering. He will burn the fat on the altar, and it will be a pleasing aroma to the Lord. Through this process, the priest will purify the people, making them right with the Lord, and they will be forgiven. If the people bring a sheep as their sin offering, it must be a female with no defects. They must lay a hand on the head of the sin offering and slaughter it at the place where burnt offerings are slaughtered. Then the priest will dip his finger in the blood of the sin offering and put it on the horns of the altar for burnt offerings. He will pour out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. Then he must remove all the sheep's fat, just as he does with the fat of a sheep presented as a peace offering. He will burn the fat on the altar on top of the special gifts presented to the Lord. Through this process, the priest will purify the people from their sin, making them right with the Lord, and they will be forgiven.
If you are called to testify about something you have seen or that you know about, it is sinful to refuse to testify, and you will be punished for your sin. Or suppose you unknowingly touch something that is ceremonially unclean, such as the carcass of an unclean animal. When you realize what you have done, you must admit your defilement and your guilt. This is true whether it is a wild animal, a domestic animal, or an animal that scurries along the ground. Or suppose you unknowingly touch something that makes a person unclean. When you realize what you have done, you must admit your guilt. Or suppose you make a foolish vow of any kind, whether its purpose is for good or for bad. When you realize its foolishness, you must admit your guilt. When you become aware of your guilt in any of these ways, you must confess your sin. Then you must bring to the Lord as the penalty for your sin a female from the flock, either a sheep or a goat. This is a sin offering with which the priest will purify you from your sin, making you right with the Lord. But if you cannot afford to bring a sheep, you may bring to the Lord 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons as the penalty for your sin. One of the birds will be for a sin offering, and the other for a burnt offering. You must bring them to the priest, who will present the first bird as the sin offering. He will wring its neck, but without severing its head from the body. Then he will sprinkle some of the blood of the sin offering against the sides of the altar, and the rest of the blood will be drained out at the base of the altar. This is an offering for sin. The priest will then prepare the second bird as a burnt offering, following all the procedures that have been prescribed. Through this process, the priest will purify you from your sin, making you right with the Lord, and you will be forgiven. If you cannot afford to bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, you may bring 2 quarts of choice flour for your sin offering. Since it is an offering for sin, you must not moisten it with olive oil or put any frankincense on it. Take the flour to the priest, who will scoop out a handful as a representative portion. He will burn it on the altar on top of the special gifts presented to the Lord. It is an offering for sin. Through this process, the priest will purify those who are guilty of any of these sins, making them right with the Lord, and they will be forgiven. The rest of the flour will belong to the priest, just as with the grain offering.
Then the Lord said to Moses, "If one of you commits a sin by unintentionally defiling the Lord's sacred property, you must bring a guilt offering to the Lord. The offering must be your own ram with no defects, or you may buy one of equal value with silver as measured by the weight of the sanctuary shekel. You must make restitution for the sacred property you have harmed by paying for the loss, plus an additional 20%. When you give the payment to the priest, he will purify you with the ram sacrificed as a guilt offering, making you right with the Lord, and you will be forgiven. Suppose you sin by violating one of the Lord's commands. Even if you are unaware of what you have done, You are guilty and will be punished for your sin. For a guilt offering, you must bring to the priest your own ram with no defects, or you may buy one of equal value. Through this process, the priest will purify you from your unintentional sin, making you right with the Lord, and you will be forgiven. This is a guilt offering, for you have been guilty of an offense against the Lord.
Then the Lord said to Moses, "Suppose one of you sins against your associate and is unfaithful to the Lord. Suppose you cheat in a deal involving a security deposit, or you steal or commit fraud, or you find lost property and lie about it, or you lie while swearing to tell the truth, or you commit any other such sin. If you have sinned in any of these ways, you are guilty. You must give back whatever you stole, or the money you took by extortion, or the security deposit, or the lost property you found, or anything obtained by swearing falsely. You must make restitution by paying the full price plus an additional 20% to the person you have harmed. On the same day, you must present a guilt offering. As a guilt offering to the Lord, you must bring to the priest your own ram with no defects, or you may buy one of equal value. Through this process, the priest will purify you before the Lord, making you right with him, and you will be forgiven for any of these sins you have committed." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Give Aaron and his sons the following instructions regarding the burnt offering. The burnt offering must be left on top of the altar until the next morning, and the fire on the altar must be kept burning all night. In the morning, after the priest on duty has put on his official linen clothing and linen undergarments, he must clean out the ashes of the burnt offering and put them beside the altar. Then he must take off these garments, change back into his regular clothes, and carry the ashes outside the camp to a place that is ceremonially clean. Meanwhile, the fire on the altar must be kept burning. It must never go out. Each morning the priest will add fresh wood to the fire and arrange the burnt offering on it. He will then burn the fat of the peace offerings on it. Remember, the fire must be kept burning on the altar at all times. It must never go out." These are the instructions regarding the grain offering. Aaron's sons must present this offering to the Lord in front of the altar. The priest on duty will take from the grain offering a handful of the choice flour moistened with olive oil, together with all the frankincense. He will burn this representative portion on the altar as a pleasing aroma to the Lord. Aaron and his sons may eat the rest of the flour, but it must be baked without yeast and eaten in a sacred place within the courtyard of the tabernacle. Remember, it must never be prepared with yeast. I have given it to the priests as their share of the special gifts presented to me. Like the sin offering and the guilt offering, it is most holy. Any of Aaron's male descendants may eat from the special gifts presented to the Lord. This is their permanent right from generation to generation. Anyone or anything that touches these offerings will become holy.
Then the Lord said to Moses, "On the day Aaron and his sons are anointed, they must present to the Lord the standard grain offering of 2 quarts of choice flour, half to be offered in the morning and half to be offered in the evening. It must be carefully mixed with olive oil and cooked on a griddle. Then slice this grain offering and present it as a pleasing aroma to the Lord. In each generation, the high priest who succeeds Aaron must prepare this same offering. It belongs to the Lord and must be burned up completely. This is a permanent law. All such grain offerings of a priest must be burned up entirely. None of it may be eaten." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Give Aaron and his sons the following instructions regarding the sin offering. The animal given as an offering for sin is a most holy offering, and it must be slaughtered in the Lord's presence at the place where the burnt offerings are slaughtered. The priest who offers the sacrifice as a sin offering must eat his portion in a sacred place within the courtyard of the tabernacle. Anyone or anything that touches the sacrificial meat will become holy. If any of the sacrificial blood spatters on a person's clothing, the soiled garment must be washed in a sacred place. If a clay pot is used to boil the sacrificial meat, it must then be broken. If a bronze pot is used, it must be scoured and thoroughly rinsed with water. Any male from a priest's family may eat from this offering. It is most holy. But the offering for sin may not be eaten if its blood was brought into the tabernacle as an offering for purification in the holy place. It must be completely burned with fire."
These are the instructions for the guilt offering. It is most holy. The animal sacrificed as a guilt offering must be slaughtered at the place where the burnt offerings are slaughtered. and its blood must be splattered against all sides of the altar. The priest will then offer all its fat on the altar, including the fat of the broad tail, the fat around the internal organs, the 2 kidneys and the fat around them near the loins, and the long lobe of the liver. These are to be removed with the kidneys, and the priests will burn them on the altar as a special gift presented to the Lord. This is the guilt offering. Any male from a priest's family may eat the meat. It must be eaten in a sacred place, for it is most holy. The same instructions apply to both the guilt offering and the sin offering. Both belong to the priest who uses them to purify someone, making that person right with the Lord. In the case of the burnt offering, the priest may keep the hide of the sacrificed animal. Any grain offering that has been baked in an oven, prepared in a pan, or cooked on a griddle belongs to the priest who presents it. All other grain offerings, whether made of dry flour or flour moistened with olive oil, are to be shared equally among all the priests, the descendants of Aaron. These are the instructions regarding the different kinds of peace offerings that may be presented to the Lord. If you present your peace offering as an expression of thanksgiving, the usual animal sacrifice must be accompanied by various kinds of bread made without yeast, thin cakes mixed with olive oil, wafers spread with oil, and cakes made of choice flour mixed with olive oil. This peace offering of thanksgiving must also be accompanied by loaves of bread made with yeast. One of each kind of bread must be presented as a gift to the Lord. It will then belong to the priest who splatters the blood of the peace offering against the altar. The meat of the peace offering of thanksgiving must be eaten on the same day it is offered. None of it may be saved for the next morning. If you bring an offering to fulfill a vow or as a voluntary offering, the meat must be eaten on the same day the sacrifice is offered, but whatever is left over may be eaten on the second day. Any meat left over until the third day must be completely burned up. If any of the meat from the peace offering is eaten on the third day, the person who presented it will not be accepted by the Lord. You will receive no credit for offering it. Meat that touches anything ceremonially unclean may not be eaten. It must be completely burned up. The rest of the meat may be eaten, but only by people who are ceremonially clean. If you are ceremonially unclean and you eat meat from a peace offering that was presented to the Lord, you will be cut off from the community. If you touch anything that is unclean and then eat meat from a peace offering presented to the Lord, you will be cut off from the community.
The forbidden blood and fat. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. You must never eat fat, whether from cattle, sheep, or goats. The fat of an animal found dead or torn to pieces by wild animals must never be eaten, though it may be used for any other purpose. Anyone who eats fat from an animal presented as a special gift to the Lord will be cut off from the community. No matter where you live, you must never consume the blood of any bird or animal. Anyone who consumes blood will be cut off from the community, a portion for the priests." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. When you present a peace offering to the Lord, bring part of it as a gift to the Lord. Present it to the Lord with your own hands as a special gift to the Lord. Bring the fat of the animal, together with the breast, and lift up the breast as a special offering to the Lord. Then the priest will burn the fat on the altar, but the breast will belong to Aaron and his descendants. Give the right thigh of your peace offering to the priest as a gift. The right thigh must always be given to the priest who offers the blood and the fat of the peace offering. For I have reserved the breast of the special offering and the right thigh of the sacred offering for the priests. It is the permanent right of Aaron and his descendants to share in the peace offerings brought by the people of Israel. This is their rightful share. The special gifts presented to the Lord have been reserved for Aaron and his descendants from the time they were set apart to serve the Lord as priests. On the day they were anointed, the Lord commanded the Israelites to give these portions to the priests as their permanent share from generation to generation. These are the instructions for the burnt offering, the grain offering, the sin offering, and the guilt offering, as well as the ordination offering and the peace offering. The Lord gave these instructions to Moses on Mount Sinai when he commanded the Israelites to present their offerings to the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai.
Then the Lord said to Moses, "Bring Aaron and his sons along with their sacred garments, the anointing oil, the bull for the sin offering, the 2 rams, and the basket of bread made without yeast, and call the entire community of Israel together at the entrance of the tabernacle." So Moses followed the Lord's instructions, and the whole community assembled at the tabernacle entrance. Moses announced to them, "This is what the Lord has commanded us to do." Then he presented Aaron and his sons and washed them with water. He put the official tunic on Aaron and tied the sash around his waist. He dressed him in the robe, placed the ephod on him, and attached the ephod securely with its decorative sash. Then Moses placed the chest piece on Aaron and put the Urim and the Thummim inside it. He placed the turban on Aaron's head and attached the gold medallion, the badge of holiness, to the front of the turban, just as the Lord had commanded him. Then Moses took the anointing oil and anointed the tabernacle and everything in it, making them holy. He sprinkled the oil on the altar 7 times, anointing it and all its utensils, as well as the wash basin and its stand, making them holy. Then he poured some of the anointing oil on Aaron's head, anointing him and making him holy for his work. Next Moses presented Aaron's sons. He clothed them in their tunics, tied their sashes around them, and put their special head coverings on them, just as the Lord had commanded him. Then Moses presented the bull for the sin offering. Aaron and his sons laid their hands on the bull's head, and Moses slaughtered it. Moses took some of the blood, and with his finger he put it on the 4 horns of the altar to purify it. He poured out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar, making it holy. Moses then took all the fat around the internal organs, the long lobe of the liver, and the 2 kidneys and the fat around them, and burned it all on the altar. The rest of the bull, including its hide, meat, and dung, was burned on a fire outside the camp, following the Lord's command. Next, Moses presented the ram for the burnt offering. Aaron and his sons laid their hands on the ram's head, and Moses slaughtered it. The ram's blood was splattered against all sides of the altar. Moses cut the ram into pieces, burning the head, some pieces, and the fat on the altar. After washing the internal organs and the legs with water, Moses burned the entire ram on the altar as a burnt offering, pleasing the Lord. Then Moses presented the ram of ordination. Aaron and his sons laid their hands on the ram's head, and Moses slaughtered it. Some of its blood was applied to Aaron's right ear, right thumb, and right big toe. The same was done for Aaron's sons. The rest of the blood was splattered against all sides of the altar.
Next, Moses took the fat, including the fat of the broad tail, the fat around the internal organs, the long lobe of the liver, and the 2 kidneys and the fat around them, along with the right thigh. On top of these, he placed a thin cake of bread made without yeast, a cake of bread mixed with olive oil, and a wafer spread with olive oil. All these were taken from the basket of bread made without yeast that was placed in the Lord's presence. He put all these in the hands of Aaron and his sons, and he lifted these gifts as a special offering to the Lord. Moses then took all the offerings back from them and burned them on the altar on top of the burnt offering. This was the ordination offering. It was a pleasing aroma, a special gift presented to the Lord. Then Moses took the breast and lifted it up as a special offering to the Lord. This was Moses' portion of the ram of ordination, just as the Lord had commanded him. Next, Moses took some of the anointing oil and some of the blood that was on the altar, and he sprinkled them on Aaron and his garments and on his sons and their garments. In this way, he made Aaron and his sons and their garments holy. Then Moses said to Aaron and his sons, "Boil the remaining meat of the offerings at the tabernacle entrance and eat it there, along with the bread that is in the basket of offerings for the ordination, just as I commanded when I said, 'Aaron and his sons will eat it.' Any meat or bread that is left over must then be burned up. You must not leave the tabernacle entrance for 7 days, for that is when the ordination ceremony will be completed. Everything we have done today was commanded by the Lord in order to purify you, making you right with him. Now stay at the entrance of the tabernacle day and night for 7 days, and do everything the Lord requires. If you fail to do this, you will die, for this is what the Lord has commanded." So Aaron and his sons did everything the Lord had commanded through Moses.
The priests begin their work. After the ordination ceremony, on the 8th day, Moses called together Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. He said to Aaron, "Take a young bull for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering, both without defects, and present them to the Lord. Then tell the Israelites, take a male goat for a sin offering, and take a calf and a lamb, both a year old and without defects, for a burnt offering. Also take a bull and a ram for a peace offering, and flour moistened with olive oil for a grain offering. Present all these offerings to the Lord, because the Lord will appear to you today." So the people presented all these things at the entrance of the tabernacle, just as Moses had commanded. Then the whole community came forward and stood before the Lord. And Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded you to do, so that the glory of the Lord may appear to you." Then Moses said to Aaron, "Come to the altar and sacrifice your sin offering and your burr."
Aaron's sons Nadab and Abihu put coals of fire in their incense burners and sprinkled incense over them. In this way, they disobeyed the Lord by burning before him the wrong kind of fire, different than he had commanded. So fire blazed forth from the Lord's presence and burned them up, and they died there before the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord meant when he said, 'I will display my holiness through those who come near me. I will display my glory before all the people.'" And Aaron was silent. Then Moses called for Mishael and Elzaphan, Aaron's cousins, the sons of Aaron's uncle Uzziel. He said to them, "Come forward and carry away the bodies of your relatives from in front of the sanctuary to a place outside the camp." So they came forward and picked them up by their garments and carried them out of the camp, just as Moses had commanded. Then Moses said to Aaron and his sons Eleazar and Ithamar, "Do not show grief by leaving your hair uncombed or by tearing your clothes. If you do, you will die, and the Lord's anger will strike the whole community of Israel. However, the rest of the Israelites, your relatives, may mourn because of the Lord's fiery destruction of Nadab and Abihu. But you must not leave the entrance of the tabernacle, or you will die, for you have been anointed with the Lord's anointing oil." So they did as Moses commanded.
Then the Lord said to Aaron, "You and your descendants must never drink wine or any other alcoholic drink before going into the tabernacle. If you do, you will die. This is a permanent law for you, and it must be observed from generation to generation. You must distinguish between what is sacred and what is common, between what is ceremonially unclean and what is clean. And you must teach the Israelites all the decrees that the Lord has given them through Moses." Moses said to Aaron and his remaining sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, "Take what is left of the grain offering after a portion has been presented as a special gift to the Lord, and eat it beside the altar. Make sure it contains no yeast, for it is most holy. You must eat it in a sacred place, for it has been given to you and your descendants as your portion of the special gifts presented to the Lord. But the breast and thigh that were lifted up as a special offering may be eaten in any place that is ceremonially clean. You must lift up the thigh and breast as a special offering to the Lord, along with the fat of the special gifts. These parts will belong to you and your descendants as your permanent right, just as the Lord has commanded." Moses then asked them what had happened to the goat of the sin offering. When he discovered it had been burned up, he became very angry with Eleazar and Ithamar, Aaron's remaining sons. Aaron answered Moses, "Today my sons presented both their sin offering and their burnt offering to the Lord, and yet this tragedy has happened to me. If I had eaten the people's sin offering on such a tragic day as this, would the Lord have been pleased?" And when Moses heard this, he was satisfied.
Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. Of all the land animals, these are the ones you may use for food. You may eat any animal that has completely split hooves and chews the cud. You may not, however, eat the following animals that have split hooves or that chew the cud, but not both. The camel chews the cud but does not have split hooves, so it is ceremonially unclean for you. The hyrax chews the cud but does not have split hooves, so it is unclean. The hare chews the cud but does not have split hooves, so it is unclean. The pig has evenly split hooves but does not chew the cud, so it is unclean. You may not eat the meat of these animals or even touch their carcasses. They are ceremonially unclean for you. Of all the marine animals, these are ones you may use for food. You may eat anything from the water if it has both fins and scales, whether taken from salt water or from streams, but you must never eat animals from the sea or from rivers that do not have both fins and scales. They are detestable to you. This applies both to little creatures that live in shallow water and to all creatures that live in deep water. They will always be detestable to you.
You must never eat their meat or even touch their dead bodies. Any marine animal that does not have both fins and scales is detestable to you. These are the birds that are detestable to you. You must never eat them. The griffin vulture, the bearded vulture, the black vulture, the kite, falcons of all kinds, ravens of all kinds, the eagle owl, the short-eared owl, the seagull, hawks of all kinds, the little owl, the cormorant, the great owl, the barn owl, the desert owl, the Egyptian vulture, the stork, herons of all kinds, the hoopoe, and the bat. You must not eat winged insects that walk along the ground. They are detestable to you. You may, however, eat winged insects that walk along the ground and have jointed legs so they can jump. The insects you are permitted to eat include all kinds of locusts, bald locusts, crickets, and grasshoppers. All other winged insects that walk along the ground are detestable to you. The following creatures will make you ceremonially unclean. If any of you touch their carcasses, you will be defiled until evening. If you pick up their carcasses, you must wash your clothes, and you will remain defiled until evening. Any animal that has split hooves that are not evenly divided or that does not chew the cud is unclean for you. If you touch the carcass of such an animal, you will be defiled. Of the animals that walk on all fours, those that have paws are unclean. If you touch the carcass of such an animal, you will be defiled until evening. If you pick up its carcass, you must wash your clothes, and you will remain defiled until evening. These animals are unclean for you.
Of the small animals that scurry along the ground, these are unclean for you. The mole rat, the rat, large lizards of all kinds, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the common lizard, the sand lizard, and the chameleon, all these small animals are unclean for you. If any of you touch the dead body of such an animal, you will be defiled until evening. If such an animal dies and falls on something, that object will be unclean. This is true whether the object is made of wood, cloth, leather, or burlap. Whatever its use, you must dip it in water, and it will remain defiled until evening. After that, it will be ceremonially clean and may be used again. If such an animal falls into a clay pot, everything in the pot will be defiled, and the pot must be smashed. If the water from such a container spills on any food, the food will be defiled, and any beverage in such a container will be defiled. Any object on which the carcass of such an animal falls will be defiled. If it is an oven or hearth, it must be destroyed, for it is defiled, and you must treat it accordingly. However, if the carcass of such an animal falls into a spring or a cistern, the water will still be clean, but anyone who touches the carcass will be defiled. If the carcass falls on seed grain to be planted in the field, the seed will still be considered clean, but if the seed is wet when the carcass falls on it, the seed will be defiled. If an animal you are permitted to eat dies and you touch its carcass, you will be defiled until evening. If you eat any of its meat or carry away its carcass, you must wash your clothes, and you will remain defiled until evening. All small animals that scurry along the ground are detestable, and you must never eat them. This includes all animals that slither along on their bellies, as well as those with 4 legs and those with many feet. All such animals that scurry along the ground are detestable, and you must never eat them. Do not defile yourselves by touching them. You must not make yourselves ceremonially unclean because of them. For I am the Lord your God. You must consecrate yourselves and be holy, because I am holy. So do not defile yourselves with any of these small animals that scurry along the ground. For I, the Lord, am the one who brought you up from the land of Egypt, that I might be your God. Therefore you must be holy, because I am holy. These are the instructions regarding land animals, birds, marine creatures, and animals that scurry along the ground. By these instructions you will know what is unclean and clean, and which animals may be eaten and which may not be eaten.
The Lord said to Moses, "Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. If a woman becomes pregnant and gives birth to a son, she will be ceremonially unclean for 7 days, just as she is unclean during her menstrual period. On the 8th day, the boy's foreskin must be circumcised. After waiting 33 days, she will be purified from the bleeding of childbirth. During this time of purification, she must not touch anything that is set apart as holy, and she must not enter the sanctuary until her time of purification is over. If a woman gives birth to a daughter, she will be ceremonially unclean for 2 weeks, just as she is unclean during her menstrual period. After waiting 66 days, she will be purified from the bleeding of childbirth. When the time of purification is completed for either a son or a daughter,
The woman must bring a 1-year-old lamb for a burnt offering and a young pigeon or turtle dove for a purification offering. She must bring her offerings to the priest at the entrance of the tabernacle. The priest will then present them to the Lord to purify her. Then she will be ceremonially clean again after her bleeding at childbirth. These are the instructions for a woman after the birth of a son or a daughter. If a woman cannot afford to bring a lamb, she must bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. One will be for the burnt offering and the other for the purification offering. The priest will sacrifice them to purify her, and she will be ceremonially clean.
The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "If anyone has a swelling or a rash or discolored skin that might develop into a serious skin disease, that person must be brought to Aaron the priest or to one of his sons. The priest will examine the affected area of the skin. If the hair in the affected area has turned white and the problem appears to be more than skin deep, it is a serious skin disease, and the priest who examines it must pronounce the person ceremonially unclean. But if the affected area of the skin is only a white discoloration and does not appear to be more than skin deep, and if the hair on the spot has not turned white, the priest will quarantine the person for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest will make another examination. If he finds the affected area has not changed and the problem has not spread on the skin, the priest will quarantine the person for 7 more days. On the 7th day, the priest will make another examination. If he finds the affected area has faded and has not spread, the priest will pronounce the person ceremonially clean. It was only a rash. The person's clothing must be washed, and the person will be ceremonially clean. But if the rash continues to spread after the person has been examined by the priest and has been pronounced clean, the infected person must return to be examined again. If the priest finds that the rash has spread, he must pronounce the person ceremonially unclean, for it is indeed a skin disease. Anyone who develops a serious skin disease must go to the priest for an examination. If the priest finds a white swelling on the skin and some hair on the spot has turned white, and there is an open sore in the affected area, it is a chronic skin disease, and the priest must pronounce the person ceremonially unclean. In such cases, the person need not be quarantined, for it is obvious that the skin is defiled by the disease. Now suppose the disease has spread all over the person's skin, covering the body from head to foot. When the priest examines the infected person and finds that the disease covers the entire body, he will pronounce the person ceremonially clean. Since the skin has turned completely white, the person is clean. But if any open sores appear, the infected person will be pronounced ceremonially unclean. The priest must make this pronouncement as soon as he sees an open sore, since open sores indicate the presence of a skin disease. However, if the open sores heal and turn white like the rest of the skin, the person must return to the priest for another examination. If the affected areas have indeed turned white, the priest will then pronounce the person ceremonially clean by declaring, "You are clean."
If anyone has a boil on the skin that has started to heal, but a white swelling or a reddish-white spot develops in its place, that person must go to the priest to be examined. If the priest examines it and finds it to be more than skin deep, and if the hair in the affected area has turned white, the priest must pronounce the person ceremonially unclean. The boil has become a serious skin disease. But if the priest finds no white hair on the affected area, and the problem appears to be no more than skin deep and has faded, the priest must quarantine the person for 7 days. If during that time the affected area spreads on the skin, the priest must pronounce the person ceremonially unclean, because it is a serious disease. But if the area grows no larger and does not spread, it is merely the scar from the boil, and the priest will pronounce the person ceremonially clean. If anyone has suffered a burn on the skin, and the burned area changes color, becoming either reddish-white or shiny white, the priest must examine it. If he finds that the hair in the affected area has turned white, and the problem appears to be more than skin deep, a skin disease has broken out in the burn. The priest must then pronounce the person ceremonially unclean, for it is clearly a serious skin disease. But if the priest finds no white hair on the affected area, and the problem appears to be no more than skin deep and has faded, the priest must quarantine the infected person for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest must examine the person again. If the affected area has spread on the skin, the priest must pronounce that person ceremonially unclean, for it is clearly a serious skin disease. But if the affected area has not changed or spread on the skin and has faded, it is simply a swelling from the burn. The priest will then pronounce the person ceremonially clean, for it is only the scar from the burn. If anyone, either a man or woman, has a sore on the head or chin, the priest must examine it. If he finds it is more than skin deep and has fine yellow hair on it, the priest must pronounce the person ceremonially unclean. It is a scabby sore of the head or chin. If the priest examines the scabby sore and finds that it is only skin deep, but there is no black hair on it, he must quarantine the person for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest must examine the sore again. If he finds that the scabby sore has not spread, and there is no yellow hair on it, and it appears to be only skin deep, the person must shave off all hair except the hair on the affected area. Then the priest must quarantine the person for another 7 days. On the 7th day, he will examine the sore again. If it has not spread and appears to be no more than skin deep, the priest will pronounce the person ceremonially clean. The person's clothing must be washed, and the person will be ceremonially clean. But if the scabby sore begins to spread after the person is pronounced clean, the priest must do another examination. If he finds that the sore has spread, the priest does not need to look for yellow hair. The infected person is ceremonially unclean. But if the color of the scabby sore does not change and black hair has grown on it, it has healed. The priest will then pronounce the person ceremonially clean.
If anyone, either a man or woman, has shiny white patches on the skin, the priest must examine the affected area. If he finds that the shiny patches are only pale white, this is a harmless skin rash and the person is ceremonially clean. If a man loses his hair and his head becomes bald, he is still ceremonially clean. And if he loses hair on his forehead, he simply has a bald forehead. He is still clean. However, if a reddish-white sore appears on the bald area on top of his head or on his forehead, this is a skin disease. The priest must examine him, and if he finds swelling around the reddish-white sore anywhere on the man's head, and it looks like a skin disease, the man is indeed infected with a skin disease and is unclean. The priest must pronounce him ceremonially unclean because of the sore on his head. Those who suffer from a serious skin disease must tear their clothing and leave their hair uncombed. They must cover their mouth and call out, "Unclean, unclean." As long as the serious disease lasts, they will be ceremonially unclean. They must live in isolation in their place outside the camp. Now suppose mildew contaminates some woolen or linen clothing, woolen or linen fabric, the hide of an animal, or anything made of leather. If the contaminated area in the clothing, the animal hide, the fabric, or the leather article has turned greenish or reddish, it is contaminated with mildew and must be shown to the priest. After examining the affected spot, the priest will put the article in quarantine for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest must inspect it again. If the contaminated area has spread, the clothing or fabric or leather is clearly contaminated by a serious mildew and is ceremonially unclean, the priest must burn the item, the clothing, the woolen or linen fabric or piece of leather, for it has been contaminated by a serious mildew. It must be completely destroyed by fire. But if the priest examines it and finds that the contaminated area has not spread in the clothing, the fabric or the leather, the priest will order the object to be washed and then quarantined for 7 more days. Then the priest must examine the object again. If he finds that the contaminated area has not changed color after being washed, even if it did not spread, the object is defiled. It must be completely burned up, whether the contaminated spot is on the inside or outside. But if the priest examines it and finds that the contaminated area has faded after being washed, he must cut the spot from the clothing, the fabric, or the leather. If the spot later reappears on the clothing, the fabric, or the leather article, the mildew is clearly spreading, and the contaminated object must be burned up. But if the spot disappears from the clothing, the fabric, or the leather article after it has been washed, it must be washed again. Then it will be ceremonially clean. These are the instructions for dealing with mildew that contaminates woolen or linen clothing, or fabric, or anything made of leather. This is how the priest will determine whether these items are ceremonially clean or unclean.
And the Lord said to Moses, "The following instructions are for those seeking ceremonial purification from a skin disease. Those who have been healed must be brought to the priest, who will examine them at a place outside the camp. If the priest finds that someone has been healed of a serious skin disease, he will perform a purification ceremony using 2 live birds that are ceremonially clean, a stick of cedar, some scarlet yarn, and a hyssop branch. The priest will order that 1 bird be slaughtered over a clay pot filled with fresh water. He will take the live bird, the cedar stick, the scarlet yarn, and the hyssop branch, and dip them into the blood of the bird that was slaughtered over the fresh water. The priest will then sprinkle the blood of the dead bird 7 times on the person being purified of the skin disease. When the priest has purified the person, he will release the live bird in the open field to fly away. The persons being purified must then wash their clothes, shave off all their hair, and bathe themselves in water. Then they will be ceremonially clean and may return to the camp. However, they must remain outside their tents for 7 days. On the 7th day they must again shave all the hair from their heads, including the hair of the beard and eyebrows. They must also wash their clothes and bathe themselves in water. Then they will be ceremonially clean. On the 8th day, each person being purified must bring 2 male lambs and a 1-year-old female lamb, all with no defects, along with a grain offering of 6 quarts of choice flour moistened with olive oil and a cup of olive oil. Then the officiating priest will present that person for purification, along with the offerings, before the Lord at the entrance of the tabernacle. The priest will take one of the male lambs and the olive oil and present them as a guilt offering, lifting them up as a special offering before the Lord. He will then slaughter the male lamb in the sacred area where sin offerings and burnt offerings are slaughtered. As with the sin offering, the guilt offering belongs to the priest. It is a most holy offering. The priest will then take some of the blood of the guilt offering and apply it to the lobe of the right ear, the thumb of the right hand, and the big toe of the right foot of the person being purified. Then the priest will pour some of the olive oil into the palm of his own left hand. He will dip his right finger into the oil in his palm and sprinkle some of it with his finger 7 times before the Lord. The priest will then apply some of the oil in his palm over the blood from the guilt offering that is on the lobe of the right ear, the thumb of the right hand, and the big toe of the right foot of the person being purified. The priest will apply the oil remaining in his hand to the head of the person being purified. Through this process, the priest will purify the person before the Lord. Then the priest must present the sin offering to purify the person who was cured of the skin disease. After that, the priest will slaughter the burnt offering and offer it on the altar, along with the grain offering. Through this process, the priest will purify the person who was healed, and the person will be ceremonially clean.
But anyone who is too poor and cannot afford these offerings may bring 1 male lamb for a guilt offering, to be lifted up as a special offering for purification. The person must also bring 2 quarts of choice flour moistened with olive oil for the grain offering, and a cup of olive oil. The offering must also include 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, whichever the person can afford. One of the pair must be used for the sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. On the 8th day of the purification ceremony, the person being purified must bring the offerings to the priest in the Lord's presence at the entrance of the tabernacle. The priest will take the lamb for the guilt offering, along with the olive oil, and lift them up as a special offering to the Lord. Then the priest will slaughter the lamb for the guilt offering. He will take some of its blood and apply it to the lobe of the right ear, the thumb of the right hand, and the big toe of the right foot of the person being purified. The priest will also pour some of the olive oil into the palm of his own left hand. He will dip his right finger into the oil in his palm and sprinkle some of it 7 times before the Lord. The priest will then apply some of the oil in his palm over the blood from the guilt offering that is on the lobe of the right ear, the thumb of the right hand, and the big toe of the right foot of the person being purified. the priest will apply the oil remaining in his hand to the head of the person being purified. Through this process, the priest will purify the person before the Lord. Then the priest will offer the 2 turtle doves or the 2 young pigeons, whichever the person can afford. One of them is for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering, to be presented along with the grain offering. Through this process, the priest will purify the person before the Lord. These are the instructions for purification for those who have recovered from a serious skin disease, but who cannot afford to bring the offerings normally required for the ceremony of purification.
Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "When you arrive in Canaan, the land I am giving you as your own possession, I may contaminate some of the houses in your land with mildew. The owner of such a house must then go to the priest and say, 'It appears that my house has some kind of mildew.' Before the priest goes in to inspect the house, he must have the house emptied, so nothing inside will be pronounced ceremonially unclean. Then the priest will go in and examine the mildew on the walls. If he finds greenish or reddish streaks, and the contamination appears to go deeper than the wall surface, the priest will step outside the door and put the house in quarantine for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest must return for another inspection. If he finds that the mildew on the walls of the house has spread, the priest must order that the stones from those areas be removed. The contaminated material will then be taken outside the town to an area designated as ceremonially unclean. Next, the inside walls of the entire house must be scraped thoroughly, and the scrapings dumped in the unclean place outside the town. Other stones will be brought in to replace the ones that were removed, and the walls will be replastered. But if the mildew reappears after all the stones have been replaced and the house has been scraped and replastered, the priest must return and inspect the house again. If he finds that the mildew has spread, the walls are clearly contaminated with a serious mildew, and the house is defiled, it must be torn down, and all its stones, timbers and plaster must be carried out of town to the place designated as ceremonially unclean. Those who enter the house during the period of quarantine will be ceremonially unclean until evening, and all who sleep or eat in the house must wash their clothing. But if the priest returns for his inspection and finds that the mildew has not reappeared in the house after the fresh plastering, he will pronounce it clean because the mildew is clearly gone. To purify the house, the priest must take 2 birds, a stick of cedar, some scarlet yarn, and a hyssop branch. He will slaughter one of the birds over a clay pot filled with fresh water. He will take the cedar stick, the hyssop branch, the scarlet yarn, and the live bird, and dip them into the blood of the slaughtered bird and into the fresh water. Then he will sprinkle the house 7 times. When the priest has purified the house in exactly this way, he will release the live bird in the open fields outside the town. Through this process, the priest will purify the house and it will be ceremonially clean. These are the instructions for dealing with serious skin diseases, including scabby sores and mildew, whether on clothing or in a house, and a swelling on the skin, a rash or discolored skin. This procedure will determine whether a person or object is ceremonially clean or unclean. These are the instructions regarding skin diseases and mildew.
The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. Any man who has a bodily discharge is ceremonially unclean. This defilement is caused by his discharge, whether the discharge continues or stops. In either case, the man is unclean. Any bed on which the man with the discharge lies and anything on which he sits will be ceremonially unclean. So if you touch the man's bed, you must wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water, and you will remain unclean until evening. If you sit where the man with the discharge has sat, you must wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water, and you will remain unclean until evening. If you touch the man with the discharge, you must wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water, and you will remain unclean until evening. If the man spits on you, you must wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water, and you will remain unclean until evening. Any saddle blanket on which the man rides will be ceremonially unclean. If you touch anything that was under the man, you will be unclean until evening. You must wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water, and you will remain unclean until evening. If the man touches you without first rinsing his hands, you must wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water, and you will remain unclean until evening. Any clay pot the man touches must be broken, and any wooden utensil he touches must be rinsed with water. When the man with the discharge is healed, he must count off 7 days for the period of purification. Then he must wash his clothes and bathe himself in fresh water, and he will be ceremonially clean. On the 8th day, he must get 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons and come before the Lord at the entrance of the tabernacle and give his offerings to the priest. The priest will offer one bird for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. Through this process, the priest will purify the man before the Lord for his discharge. Whenever a man has an emission of semen, he must bathe his entire body in water, and he will remain ceremonially unclean until the next evening. Any clothing or leather with semen on it must be washed in water, and it will remain unclean until evening. After a man and a woman have sexual intercourse, they must each bathe in water, and they will remain unclean until the next evening. Whenever a woman has her menstrual period, she will be ceremonially unclean for 7 days. Anyone who touches her during that time will be unclean until evening. Anything on which the woman lies or sits during the time of her period will be unclean. If any of you touch her bed, you must wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water, and you will remain unclean until evening. If you touch any object she has sat on, you must wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water, and you will remain unclean until evening. This includes her bed or any other object she has sat on. You will be unclean until evening if you touch it. If a man has sexual intercourse with her and her blood touches him, her menstrual impurity will be transmitted to him. He will remain unclean for 7 days, and any bed on which he lies will be unclean.
If a woman has a flow of blood for many days that is unrelated to her menstrual period, or if the blood continues beyond the normal period, she is ceremonially unclean. As during her menstrual period, the woman will be unclean as long as the discharge continues. Any bed she lies on and any object she sits on during that time will be unclean, just as during her normal menstrual period. If any of you touch these things, you will be ceremonially unclean. You must wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water, and you will remain unclean until evening. When the woman's bleeding stops, she must count off 7 days. Then she will be ceremonially clean. On the 8th day she must bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons and present them to the priest at the entrance of the tabernacle. The priest will offer one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering. Through this process the priest will purify her before the Lord for the ceremonial impurity caused by her bleeding. This is how you will guard the people of Israel from ceremonial uncleanness. Otherwise they would die, for their impurity would defile my tabernacle that stands among them. These are the instructions for dealing with anyone who has a bodily discharge, a man who is unclean because of an emission of semen or a woman during her menstrual period. It applies to any man or woman who has a bodily discharge, and to a man who has sexual intercourse with a woman who is ceremonially unclean.
The Lord spoke to Moses after the death of Aaron's 2 sons, who died after they entered the Lord's presence and burned the wrong kind of fire before him. The Lord said to Moses, "Warn your brother Aaron not to enter the most holy place behind the inner curtain whenever he chooses. If he does, he will die. For the ark's cover, the place of atonement, is there, and I myself am present in the cloud above the atonement cover." When Aaron enters the sanctuary area, he must follow these instructions fully. He must bring a young bull for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He must put on his linen tunic and the linen undergarments worn next to his body. He must tie the linen sash around his waist and put the linen turban on his head. These are sacred garments, so he must bathe himself in water before he puts them on. Aaron must take from the community of Israel 2 male goats for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. Aaron will present his own bull as a sin offering to purify himself and his family, making them right with the Lord. Then he must take the 2 male goats and present them to the Lord at the entrance of the tabernacle. He is to cast sacred lots to determine which goat will be reserved as an offering to the Lord and which will carry the sins of the people to the wilderness of Azazel. Aaron will then present as a sin offering the goat chosen by Lot for the Lord. The other goat, the scapegoat chosen by Lot to be sent away, will be kept alive, standing before the Lord. When it is sent away to Azazel in the wilderness, the people will be purified and made right with the Lord. Aaron will present his own bull as a sin offering to purify himself and his family, making them right with the Lord. After he has slaughtered the bull as a sin offering, he will fill an incense burner with burning coals from the altar that stands before the Lord. Then he will take 2 handfuls of fragrant powdered incense and will carry the burner and the incense behind the inner curtain. There in the Lord's presence, he will put the incense on the burning coals so that a cloud of incense will rise over the ark's cover, the place of atonement, that rests on the Ark of the Covenant. If he follows these instructions, he will not die. Then he must take some of the blood of the bull, dip his finger in it, and sprinkle it on the east side of the atonement cover. He must sprinkle blood 7 times with his finger in front of the atonement cover. Then Aaron must slaughter the first goat as a sin offering for the people and carry its blood behind the inner curtain. There he will sprinkle the goat's blood over the atonement cover and in front of it, just as he did with the bull's blood. Through this process, he will purify the most holy place, and he will do the same for the entire tabernacle because of the defiling sin and rebellion of the Israelites. No one else is allowed inside the tabernacle when Aaron enters it for the purification ceremony in the most holy place. No one may enter until he comes out again after purifying himself, his family, and all the congregation of Israel, making them right with the Lord.
Then Aaron will come out to purify the altar that stands before the Lord. He will do this by taking some of the blood from the bull and the goat and putting it on each of the horns of the altar. Then he must sprinkle the blood with his finger 7 times over the altar. In this way he will cleanse it from Israel's defilement and make it holy. When Aaron has finished purifying the most holy place and the tabernacle and the altar, he must present the live goat. He will lay both of his hands on the goat's head and confess over it all the wickedness, rebellion, and sins of the people of Israel. In this way, he will transfer the people's sins to the head of the goat. Then, a man specially chosen for the task will drive the goat into the wilderness. As the goat goes into the wilderness, it will carry all the people's sins upon itself into a desolate land. When Aaron goes back into the tabernacle, he must take off the linen garments he was wearing when he entered the most holy place, and he must leave the garments there. Then he must bathe himself with water in a sacred place, put on his regular garments, and go out to sacrifice a burnt offering for himself and a burnt offering for the people. Through this process he will purify himself and the people, making them right with the Lord. He must then burn all the fat of the sin offering on the altar. The man chosen to drive the scapegoat into the wilderness of Azazel must wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. Then he may return to the camp. The bull and the goat presented as sin offerings, whose blood Aaron takes into the most holy place for the purification ceremony, will be carried outside the camp. The animal's hides, internal organs, and dung are all to be burned. The man who burns them must wash his clothes and bathe himself in water before returning to the camp. On the 10th day of the appointed month in early autumn, you must deny yourselves. Neither native-born Israelites nor foreigners living among you may do any kind of work. This is a permanent law for you. On that day, offerings of purification will be made for you, and you will be purified in the Lord's presence from all your sins. It will be a Sabbath day of complete rest for you, and you must deny yourselves. This is a permanent law for you. In future generations, the purification ceremony will be performed by the priest who has been anointed and ordained to serve as high priest in place of his ancestor Aaron. He will put on the holy linen garments and purify the most holy place, the tabernacle, the altar, the priests, and the entire congregation. This is a permanent law for you, to purify the people of Israel from their sins, making them right with the Lord once each year. Moses followed all these instructions exactly as the Lord had commanded him.
Then the Lord said to Moses, "Give the following instructions to Aaron and his sons and all the people of Israel. If any native Israelite sacrifices a bull or a lamb or a goat anywhere inside or outside the camp, instead of bringing it to the entrance of the tabernacle to present it as an offering to the Lord, that person will be as guilty as a murderer. Such a person has shed blood and will be cut off from the community. The purpose of this rule is to stop the Israelites from sacrificing animals in the open fields. It will ensure that they bring their sacrifices to the priest at the entrance of the tabernacle, so he can present them to the Lord as peace offerings. Then the priest will be able to splatter the blood against the Lord's altar at the entrance of the tabernacle, and he will burn the fat as a pleasing aroma to the Lord. The people must no longer be unfaithful to the Lord by offering sacrifices to the goat idols. This is a permanent law for them to be observed from generation to generation. Give them this command as well. If any native Israelite or foreigner living among you offers a burnt offering or a sacrifice, but does not bring it to the entrance of the tabernacle to offer it to the Lord, that person will be cut off from the community. And if any native Israelite or foreigner living among you eats or drinks blood in any form, I will turn against that person and cut him off from the community of your people. For the life of the body is in its blood. I have given you the blood on the altar to purify you, making you right with the Lord. It is the blood given in exchange for a life that makes purification possible. That is why I have said to the people of Israel, you must never eat or drink blood, neither you nor the foreigners living among you. And if any native Israelite or foreigner living among you goes hunting and kills an animal or bird that is approved for eating, he must drain its blood and cover it with earth. The life of every creature is in its blood. That is why I have said to the people of Israel, you must never eat or drink blood, for the life of any creature is in its blood. So whoever consumes blood will be cut off from the community. And if any native Israelite or foreigner living among you goes hunting and kills an animal or bird that is approved for eating, he must drain its blood and cover it with earth. The life of every creature is in its blood. That is why I have said to the people of Israel, you must never eat or drink blood, for the life of any creature is in its blood. And if any native-born Israelites or foreigners eat the meat of an animal that died naturally or was torn up by wild animals, they must wash their clothes and bathe themselves in water. They will remain ceremonially unclean until evening, but then they will be clean. But if they do not wash their clothes and bathe themselves, they will be punished for their sin.
Forbidden sexual practices. Then the Lord said to Moses, give the following instructions to the people of Israel. I am the Lord your God, so do not act like the people in Egypt where you used to live, or like the people of Canaan, where I am taking you. You must not imitate their way of life. You must obey all my regulations and be careful to obey my decrees, for I am the Lord your God. If you obey my decrees and my regulations, you will find life through them. I am the Lord. You must never have sexual relations with a close relative, for I am the Lord. Do not violate your father by having sexual relations with your mother. She is your mother. You must not have sexual relations with her. Do not have sexual relations with any of your father's wives, for this would violate your father. Do not have sexual relations with your sister or half-sister, whether she is your father's daughter or your mother's daughter, whether she was born into your household or someone else's. Do not have sexual relations with your granddaughter, whether she is your son's daughter or your daughter's daughter, for this would violate yourself. Do not have sexual relations with your stepsister, the daughter of any of your father's wives, for she is your sister. Do not have sexual relations with your father's sister, for she is your father's close relative. Do not have sexual relations with your mother's sister, for she is your mother's close relative. Do not violate your uncle, your father's brother, by having sexual relations with his wife, for she is your aunt. Do not have sexual relations with your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife, so you must not have sexual relations with her. Do not have sexual relations with your brother's wife, for this would violate your brother. Do not have sexual relations with both a woman and her daughter. And do not take her granddaughter, whether her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter, and have sexual relations with her. They are close relatives, and this would be a wicked act. While your wife is living, do not marry her sister and have sexual relations with her, for they would be rivals. Do not have sexual relations with a woman during her period of menstrual impurity. Do not defile yourself by having sexual intercourse with your neighbor's wife. Do not permit any of your children to be offered as a sacrifice to Moloch, for you must not bring shame on the name of your God. I am the Lord. Do not practice homosexuality. Having sex with another man as with a woman, it is a detestable sin. A man must not defile himself by having sex with an animal, and a woman must not offer herself to a male animal to have intercourse with it. This is a perverse act. Do not defile yourselves in any of these ways, for the people I am driving out before you have defiled themselves in all these ways. Because the entire land has become defiled, I am punishing the people who live there. I will cause the land to vomit them out. You must obey all my decrees and regulations. You must not commit any of these detestable sins. This applies both to native-born Israelites and to the foreigners living among you. All these detestable activities are practiced by the people of the land where I am taking you, and this is how the land has become defiled. So do not defile the land and give it a reason to vomit you out, as it will vomit out the people who live there now. Whoever commits any of these detestable sins will be cut off from the community of Israel. So obey my instructions, and do not defile yourselves by committing any of these detestable practices that were committed by the people who lived in the land before you. I am the Lord your God.
The Lord also said to Moses, "Give the following instructions to the entire community of Israel. You must be holy because I, the Lord your God, am holy. Each of you must show great respect for your mother and father, and you must always observe my Sabbath days of rest. I am the Lord your God. Do not put your trust in idols or make metal images of gods for yourselves. I am the Lord your God. When you sacrifice a peace offering to the Lord, offer it properly so you will be accepted by God. The sacrifice must be eaten on the same day you offer it or on the next day. Whatever is left over until the third day must be completely burned up. If any of the sacrifice is eaten on the third day, it will be contaminated, and I will not accept it. Anyone who eats it on the third day will be punished for defiling what is holy to the Lord and will be cut off from the community. When you harvest the crops of your land, do not harvest the grain along the edges of your fields, and do not pick up what the harvesters drop. It is the same with your grape crop. Do not strip every last bunch of grapes from the vines, and do not pick up the grapes that fall to the ground. Leave them for the poor and the foreigners living among you. I am the Lord your God. Do not steal, do not deceive or cheat one another. Do not bring shame on the name of your God by using it to swear falsely. I am the Lord. Do not defraud or rob your neighbor. Do not make your hired workers wait until the next day to receive their pay. Do not insult the deaf or cause the blind to stumble. You must fear your God. I am the Lord. Do not twist justice in legal matters by favoring the poor or being partial to the rich and powerful. Always judge people fairly. Do not spread slanderous gossip among your people. Do not stand idly by when your neighbor's life is threatened. I am the Lord. Do not nurse hatred in your heart for any of your relatives. Confront people directly so you will not be held guilty for their sin. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against a fellow Israelite, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. You must obey all my decrees. Do not mate two different kinds of animals. Do not plant your field with two different kinds of seed. Do not wear clothing woven from two different kinds of thread. If a man has sex with a slave girl whose freedom has never been purchased, but who is committed to become another man's wife, he must pay full compensation to her master. But since she is not a free woman, neither the man nor the woman will be put to death. The man, however, must bring a ram as a guilt offering and present it to the Lord at the entrance of the tabernacle. The priest will then purify him before the Lord with the ram of the guilt offering, and the man's sin will be forgiven. When you enter the land and plant fruit trees, leave the fruit unharvested for the first 3 years and consider it forbidden. Do not eat it. In the 4th year, the entire crop must be consecrated to the Lord as a celebration of praise. Finally, in the 5th year you may eat the fruit. If you follow this pattern, your harvest will increase. I am the Lord your God. Do not eat meat that has not been drained of its blood. Do not practice fortune-telling or witchcraft. Do not trim off the hair on your temples or trim your beards. Do not cut your bodies for the dead, and do not mark your skin with tattoos. I am the Lord. Do not defile your daughter by making her a prostitute, or the land will be filled with prostitution and wickedness. Keep my Sabbath days of rest and show reverence toward my sanctuary. I am the Lord. Do not defile yourselves by turning to mediums or to those who consult the spirits of the dead. I am the Lord your God. Stand up in the presence of the elderly and show respect for the aged. Fear your God. I am the Lord. Do not take advantage of foreigners who live among you in your land. Treat them like native-born Israelites and love them as you love yourself. Remember that you were once foreigners living in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Do not use dishonest standards when measuring length, weight, or volume. Your scales and weights must be accurate. Your containers for measuring dry materials or liquids must be accurate. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. You must be careful to keep all of my decrees and regulations by putting them into practice. I am the Lord.
Introduction: A Journey into Leviticus. Leviticus, the third book of the Bible, often strikes modern readers as a dense and archaic text. It is filled with intricate rules and regulations, many of which seem irrelevant or even baffling in today's world. However, to dismiss Leviticus as outdated or irrelevant would be a mistake. It offers us a fascinating window into the beliefs and practices of the ancient Israelites. By delving into its pages, we can gain a deeper understanding of the historical, cultural, and religious landscape from which it emerged. Section 2, The Heart of Leviticus, Ritual Purity and Holiness. At the heart of Leviticus lies the concept of holiness, a state of being set apart for God. For the ancient Israelites, holiness was not merely a spiritual aspiration, it was deeply intertwined with their daily lives. Ritual purity played a central role in the Israelites' pursuit of holiness. The book is replete with instructions on ritual cleansing, addressing everything from bodily discharges to contact with unclean animals. These rituals served not only as a means of physical hygiene, but also as symbolic acts of purification. By adhering to these rituals, the Israelites could cleanse themselves of impurities and make themselves worthy of approaching God. Section 3, Ancient Laws, Modern Lenses, Understanding Leviticus 20. Leviticus 20 stands out as a particularly challenging chapter for modern readers. It contains a list of prohibited sexual acts and other offenses, each accompanied by a prescribed punishment, often death. The severity of these punishments, along with the specific nature of some of the offenses, can seem shocking and even barbaric to contemporary sensibilities. However, It is crucial to approach Leviticus 20 with sensitivity and a willingness to understand the historical and cultural context in which it was written. The laws outlined in this chapter were not intended to be arbitrary or cruel. Rather, they reflected the values and beliefs of a specific time and place, a society grappling with the challenges of survival and seeking to establish order within its community. To grasp the significance of Leviticus 20, we must consider the social and religious landscape of the ancient Near East. The Israelites lived in a world where polytheism, idolatry, and various forms of sexual immorality were commonplace. Section 4. The severity of the law, punishments, and their implications. The severity of the punishments prescribed in Leviticus 20, often death, can be particularly jarring for modern readers. It is essential to remember that these punishments reflected the legal and social norms of the ancient world, a world far different from our own. In ancient societies, law and religion were often intertwined, and punishments were often harsh and public, serving as both deterrents and expressions of communal outrage. The death penalty, though seemingly extreme by today's standards, was not uncommon in the ancient Near East. It was seen as a just punishment for serious offenses, particularly those that were believed to threaten the social order or offend the gods. In the context of Leviticus, the death penalty served not only as a punishment for individual transgressions, but also as a means of purifying the community from sin. Section 5. Incest, a timeless taboo. Leviticus 20 condemns various forms of incest, prohibiting sexual relationships between close relatives. These prohibitions reflect a universal taboo against incest that has existed across cultures and throughout history. While the specific relationships deemed incestuous may vary somewhat across societies, the core principle of prohibiting sexual relations within the immediate family is remarkably consistent. The reasons behind the incest taboo are complex and multifaceted. Anthropologists and sociologists have proposed various theories, including the need to prevent genetic disorders, the importance of maintaining social order, and the psychological ramifications of sexual relationships within the family structure. From a biological perspective, incest can increase the risk of genetic disorders, as close relatives are more likely to carry the same recessive genes. Over generations, this can lead to a decline in the health and viability of a population. Section 6. Adultery and sexual immorality, protecting the sanctity of marriage. Leviticus 20 also addresses adultery and other forms of sexual immorality, reflecting the importance placed on marriage and family in ancient Israelite society. Adultery was considered a serious offense, a violation of the marriage covenant, and a threat to the social order. The prescribed punishment for both the adulterer and the adulteress was death, highlighting the gravity with which this transgression was viewed. The prohibition against adultery served several purposes. First and foremost, it aimed to protect the sanctity of marriage, which was considered the foundation of Israelite society. Marriage was not simply a private contract between two individuals. It was a sacred institution, ordained by God and essential for the continuation of the family line and the transmission of property and inheritance. Moreover, the prohibition against adultery served to prevent sexual chaos and maintain social stability. Section 7. Child sacrifice and religious practices, a stark contrast. Leviticus 20 explicitly condemns child sacrifice, a practice that was prevalent in some of the cultures surrounding ancient Israel. The Israelites were commanded to be distinct from their neighbors, who worshipped gods that demanded such horrific sacrifices. This prohibition underscores the ethical evolution that was taking place within Israelite religion. Child sacrifice was often associated with fertility cults and the appeasement of deities believed to control the natural world. In these cultures, children were sometimes offered as the ultimate sacrifice, a gift deemed necessary to ensure a bountiful harvest or avert disaster. The Israelites' rejection of child sacrifice marked a significant departure from the religious practices of their neighbors. It reflected a growing understanding of God as a just and compassionate deity who valued human life and did not require such barbaric rituals. Section 8. Respect for the divine and authority, honoring parents and spiritual leaders. Leviticus 20 emphasizes respect for authority, both divine and human. This is evident in the commandments to honor one's parents and to show reverence for priests and religious leaders. These commandments reflect the hierarchical structure of ancient Israelite society, where obedience to authority was considered essential for maintaining social order and upholding religious tradition. Honoring one's parents was considered a fundamental duty in ancient Israel. Children were expected to obey their parents, care for them in their old age, and uphold the family's honor. This commandment was rooted in the belief that parents were God's representatives on earth, responsible for guiding and nurturing their children. Similarly, respect for priests and religious leaders was paramount. Section 9. Leviticus 20 in context, a product of its time. Leviticus 20, with its seemingly harsh laws and punishments, can be a challenging text for modern readers. However, it is essential to remember that this chapter, like the rest of the Bible, is a product of its time. To truly understand its message, we must view it through the lens of the historical and cultural context in which it was written. The ancient Israelites lived in a world vastly different from our own. They faced constant threats from neighboring tribes, struggled to survive in a harsh environment, and were surrounded by cultures with very different values and beliefs. In this context, the laws of Leviticus 20 served as a blueprint for survival, a way of maintaining order, and a means of distinguishing the Israelites from their neighbors. It is also important to note that the laws of Leviticus 20 were not always applied literally or consistently. Section 10. The evolution of morality, from ancient laws to modern values. The laws of Leviticus 20, while rooted in a specific historical and cultural context, have also sparked ongoing debate and reflection on the nature of morality and its evolution over time. The ethical principles embodied in these laws, though expressed in ways that may seem foreign to us today, have resonated with people across cultures and centuries, prompting contemplation on justice, compassion, and the relationship between the individual and society. The journey from the ancient laws of Leviticus to modern moral values is a complex and multifaceted one, shaped by philosophical inquiry, religious interpretations, social movements, and scientific discoveries. As societies have evolved, so too have our understandings of right and wrong, justice and mercy, individual rights and social responsibilities. The abolition of slavery, the fight for gender equality, the recognition of LGBTQ+ rights. These milestones in human history reflect a growing awareness of the inherent dignity and worth of every individual, regardless of race, gender, religion, or sexual orientation. These advancements demonstrate the capacity for moral progress, for societies to challenge and ultimately transcend even deeply ingrained beliefs and practices. Section 11. Timeless Wisdom, Lessons from Leviticus for Today's World. Although many of the specific laws and punishments outlined in Leviticus 20 may seem irrelevant or even abhorrent to modern readers, this ancient text still offers valuable insights that can enrich our understanding of morality, spirituality, and the human condition. By looking beyond the literal interpretations of these laws, we can uncover timeless wisdom that transcends cultural and historical boundaries. Leviticus 20, despite its focus on punishment and purity, ultimately points to a profound yearning for holiness, for a life lived in harmony with the divine and in right relationship with others. This desire for holiness, for a deeper connection with the sacred, resonates with people across cultures and spiritual traditions. Moreover, Leviticus 20 reminds us of the importance of social responsibility, of the interconnectedness of individuals within a community. The laws against adultery, incest, and other forms of social transgression highlight the ways in which our actions impact not only ourselves, but also those around us, shaping the moral fabric of society as a whole. Section 12. Conclusion: Bridging the gap between ancient laws and modern perspectives. Leviticus 20, with its seemingly harsh laws and punishments, stands as a testament to the vast gulf that often separates ancient and modern perspectives. Yet, despite the passage of millennia, this ancient text continues to challenge, provoke, and inspire, inviting us to engage in a dialogue across time and cultures. While we may rightly reject some of the specific laws and practices outlined in Leviticus 20, it is essential to avoid simply dismissing this text as irrelevant or barbaric. By approaching it with sensitivity, humility, and a willingness to understand the historical and cultural context in which it was written, we can glean valuable insights into the evolution of morality, the nature of religious belief, and the enduring human search for meaning and purpose. The journey from the ancient laws of Leviticus to modern moral values is a testament to the human capacity for growth, adaptation, and moral progress. As our understanding of the world has expanded, so too has our sense of empathy, compassion, and the inherent dignity of every individual.
Leviticus, often viewed as a book of laws and rituals, offers a fascinating glimpse into the life and duties of the ancient Israelites, particularly the priestly class. Chapter 21 unveils the strict code of conduct expected of the priests, highlighting their crucial role as mediators between God and the people. This chapter serves as a blueprint for holiness, outlining the rituals and regulations that separated the priests and, by extension, the sanctuary from the ordinary. By delving into these ancient verses, we gain a deeper understanding of the Israelites' relationship with the divine and the profound significance they placed on ritual purity. Every aspect of their lives, from their attire to their interactions, was governed by divine ordinances. These regulations served as tangible reminders of the priest's sacred duty to maintain the sanctity of the temple and, symbolically, the covenant between God and Israel. By adhering to these laws, the priests embodied holiness, becoming living embodiments of God's presence amongst his people. Leviticus 21 begins by outlining the priestly lineage, emphasizing the hereditary nature of this sacred role. The priests were descendants of Aaron, the brother of Moses, chosen by God to serve as intermediaries between the divine and the human. This lineage underscores the significance of tradition and continuity in maintaining the sanctity of the priesthood. The emphasis on lineage also points to the sacred nature of the priesthood. The priests, by virtue of their ancestry, were set apart, consecrated for a life dedicated to the service of God. Leviticus 21 doesn't merely define the priestly lineage, but also outlines specific rules regarding their physical appearance and attire. These regulations, though seemingly superficial to the modern reader, held deep symbolic meaning. The priests were to maintain a distinct appearance, setting them apart from the rest of the Israelites. Their clothing, their grooming habits, even their interactions with the dead were governed by divine ordinances designed to maintain their ritual purity and symbolize their unique role. By adhering to these rules, the priests were making a public declaration of their dedication to the divine, signaling their unique position within the community. The strict regulations imposed on the priests in Leviticus 21 highlight the immense responsibility they carried. They weren't merely religious functionaries performing rituals, they were representatives of God, intermediaries between the divine and the human. Their actions, their appearance, their very being reflected upon the sanctity of the temple and, by extension, the covenant between God and Israel. They were to be above reproach, their lives reflecting the divine standards expected of those who served in such close proximity to God. The priests' role as representatives extended beyond the confines of the temple. Purity and the divine presence, the consequence of imperfection. Leviticus 21 dedicates a significant portion to outlining the consequences for priests who become ritually impure. This emphasis on purity, though often misunderstood, is central to understanding the ancient Israelite worldview and their relationship with the divine. For them, holiness wasn't merely an abstract concept, but a tangible state of being, a prerequisite for approaching the divine presence. Any blemish, any impurity created a separation, a barrier between the human and the divine. Restrictions and ritual purity. Navigating the sacred and the profane. The concept of ritual purity extended beyond physical imperfections. Leviticus 21 outlines various situations and substances that could render a priest temporarily impure, such as contact with the dead, bodily fluids, or certain animals. These restrictions, though seemingly arbitrary to the modern mind, were deeply ingrained in the Israelite worldview, reflecting their understanding of the sacred and the profane. By adhering to these regulations, they maintained the sanctity of the temple, ensuring that their service remained pleasing to God and beneficial to the community. Beyond physical boundaries, the inner sanctuary of holiness. While Leviticus 21 focuses heavily on outward signs of holiness and ritual purity, it also hints at a deeper, more profound understanding of holiness. The priest's adherence to these regulations wasn't merely about maintaining physical purity, it was about cultivating an inner state of being, a spiritual purity that reflected their closeness to God. These regulations, though physical in nature, fostered a heightened awareness of their actions, their thoughts, and their intentions. They were to embody holiness in every aspect of their lives, both within the temple and within the community. This verse suggests that true holiness transcended outward appearances and rituals, penetrating the very core of their being. Echoes in time, monasticism, and the pursuit of purity. The strict regulations governing the lives of priests in Leviticus 21 find a fascinating parallel in the rise of monasticism in various religious traditions. Just as the Levitical priests adhered to strict codes of conduct to maintain their ritual purity, monastic orders developed their own sets of rules and disciplines designed to foster spiritual growth and detachment from worldly desires. These rules often included vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, mirroring the restrictions placed on the priests in terms of marriage, possessions, and social interactions. The parallels between the Levitical priesthood and monasticism highlight the universality of certain human impulses. Modern priesthoods, reflections of Leviticus in contemporary spirituality. While the specific regulations outlined in Leviticus 21 might seem archaic in today's secularized world, the underlying principles of holiness, purity, and dedication to the divine continue to resonate with contemporary understandings of spirituality and religious leadership. The echoes of these ancient laws can be seen in the roles and expectations placed upon religious leaders in various faiths today. The emphasis on moral and ethical conduct, so central to the Levitical priesthood, also finds resonance in contemporary religious leadership. They are expected to be exemplars of piety, compassion, and righteousness, their lives reflecting the teachings they espouse. The enduring message of Leviticus holiness in a secular age. In our increasingly secularized world, where the lines between the sacred and the profane have become blurred, the message of Leviticus 21 might seem antiquated. However, a closer examination reveals its enduring relevance, offering valuable insights into the human condition and our timeless search for meaning and purpose. The emphasis on holiness, though often misunderstood, speaks to a fundamental human need: the desire to transcend the mundane, to connect with something greater than ourselves. This yearning for transcendence finds expression in various forms, from religious faith to artistic pursuits to acts of selfless service. It reminds us that we are not merely material beings, but spiritual beings, hardwired to seek meaning and purpose beyond the material world. Conclusion: the timeless relevance of ancient wisdom. Leviticus 21, though deeply rooted in its ancient Near Eastern context, offers timeless wisdom that transcends cultural and historical boundaries. It provides a glimpse into the human yearning for holiness, the desire to connect with the divine, and the importance of living a life guided by ethical and spiritual principles. While the specific regulations might seem archaic today, the underlying principles retain their power, offering valuable insights into the human condition and our ongoing quest for meaning and purpose. It's a call to cultivate an inner sanctuary, a space within ourselves where we can connect with the divine and nurture our spiritual growth. In a world grappling with complex ethical dilemmas and searching for spiritual grounding, the ancient wisdom of Leviticus 21 offers a timeless compass, guiding us towards a life of meaning, purpose, and deeper connection with the divine. Holiness and Purity, an introduction to Leviticus. Leviticus holds a special place in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. It follows the Israelites' exodus from Egypt and their covenant with God at Mount Sinai. This book outlines the rituals and laws that govern their relationship with Yahweh, their God. Central to Leviticus is the concept of holiness, a state of being set apart for God. This holiness permeates every aspect of life, from the priests who perform rituals to the food consumed and the treatment of the sick. Leviticus 22 in particular focuses on the theme of purity in worship. It details who can offer sacrifices to God and the condition those offerings must meet. The chapter emphasizes the sanctity of the altar and the importance of approaching God with reverence and respect. Purity, in this context, is not merely about hygiene, but about maintaining a state of spiritual wholeness and alignment with God's will. By adhering to these regulations, the Israelites expressed their commitment to the covenant and maintained their relationship with the divine. These rituals, meticulously observed, shaped their understanding of themselves and their relationship with the sacred. The priests, guardians of the sacred. Leviticus 22 begins by addressing the priests, the intermediaries between God and the Israelites. They bear the responsibility of ensuring the sanctity of the sanctuary and the acceptability of offerings. The priests themselves are subject to strict purity regulations. They must be free from physical blemishes and avoid contact with anything considered ritually impure. These rules highlight the elevated status of the priests and the importance of their role in maintaining the sacred order. The priests' actions are not merely functional, but deeply symbolic. Their washing and purification rituals represent a cleansing from sin and a preparation to enter the divine presence. Their meticulous examination of the sacrificial animals ensures that only the best and unblemished are offered to God. Through their teachings and example, they transmit the values and beliefs that underpin the entire Israelite society. Imperfect offerings when worship is unacceptable. Leviticus 22 lists the types of sacrifices that are unacceptable to God. Animals with blemishes, injuries, or diseases are deemed unfit for offering. A blemished animal symbolized imperfection and was therefore not a fitting representation of the Israelites' devotion to a perfect God. The rejection of imperfect offerings underscores the seriousness of approaching God in worship. God desires the Israelites' wholehearted devotion, not just outward conformity to a set of rules. Their offerings represent their very selves, their time, their labor, and their commitment to their relationship with the divine. These regulations fostered a deep awareness of God's presence and the importance of approaching Him with humility and sincerity. The act of sacrifice was a sacred encounter, demanding their utmost attention and reverence. Beyond the physical, the moral dimension of purity. While Leviticus 22 focuses primarily on ritual purity, it also hints at a deeper moral dimension. The emphasis on wholeness and perfection in offerings reflects a desire for moral integrity and spiritual purity. Just as a blemished animal is unacceptable to God, so too are hypocrisy, deceit, and injustice. True worship requires not only outward conformity to ritual, but also inward transformation and ethical behavior. The connection between ritual purity and moral conduct is a recurring theme throughout the Hebrew Bible. True holiness is about aligning one's heart and actions with God's will. The laws of Leviticus 22 reflect a worldview where the physical and spiritual are inextricably linked. This holistic understanding of purity challenges us to consider how our own rituals and practices shape our values and beliefs. Leviticus 22 also addresses the importance of observing the designated festival feasts. These celebrations, such as Passover, Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles, marked key events in the Israelites' history and served as powerful reminders of God's faithfulness and provision. During these festivals, the Israelites would gather together to offer sacrifices, share meals, and celebrate their identity as God's chosen people. These feasts were not merely social gatherings, but deeply religious occasions, They provided opportunities for the Israelites to express their gratitude to God for His blessings and to reaffirm their covenant with Him. The rituals and sacrifices performed during these festivals served as tangible expressions of their dependence on God. The emphasis on communal celebration highlights the social dimension of Israelite religion. These gatherings fostered a sense of belonging, reminding each individual that they were part of something larger than themselves. Holiness in everyday life, a timeless principle. While Leviticus 22 focuses on specific rituals and regulations, its underlying message about holiness has timeless relevance. The call to be set apart for God is not limited to ancient Israel or to formal religious practices. It is a universal principle that can find expression in every aspect of life. Holiness is about living a life of integrity, compassion, and purpose. It is about aligning our thoughts, words, and actions with our deepest values. This pursuit of wholeness and integrity is a journey, not a destination. The underlying principle remains relevant, the call to live a life of purpose and meaning grounded in our deepest values and aspirations. Modern interpretations, relevance in a different world. The specific regulations outlined in Leviticus the 22nd of May seem archaic or irrelevant to many people today. However, the underlying principles of holiness, reverence, and ethical conduct continue to resonate with people of diverse faiths and backgrounds. Many contemporary readers find inspiration in the moral and spiritual dimensions of Leviticus. They may focus on the importance of integrity, compassion, and social justice. Others may find meaning in the rituals and symbolism of Leviticus, even if they do not observe them literally. The enduring power of Leviticus lies in its ability to spark reflection on the nature of holiness and its relevance in our own lives. The enduring power of ritual shaping beliefs and values. Leviticus 22 highlights the power of ritual in shaping beliefs and values. The meticulous observance of these ancient practices played a crucial role in shaping the Israelites' understanding of themselves and their relationship with God. Rituals engage both the body and the mind, creating a powerful and memorable experience that reinforces beliefs and values. While the specific rituals described in Leviticus may no longer be practiced in the same way, the underlying principle remains relevant. Rituals, both religious and secular, continue to play a vital role in shaping our understanding of the world and our place within it. The enduring power of Leviticus 22 lies in its reminder of the profound impact that rituals have on shaping our understanding of the sacred. Conclusion: Leviticus and the search for meaning. Leviticus 22 offers a fascinating glimpse into the religious worldview of ancient Israel. Its detailed regulations concerning ritual purity and sacrifice reflect a deep reverence for the sacred and a desire to live in right relationship with God. While the specific practices described in Leviticus may no longer be observed in the same way, the underlying principles of holiness, reverence, and ethical conduct continue to resonate with people of diverse faiths and backgrounds. The book's emphasis on wholeness, integrity, and the connection between the physical and spiritual provides timeless insights into the human search for meaning and purpose. Leviticus reminds us that true holiness is about cultivating inner purity, compassion, and a commitment to living in harmony with our deepest values. Leviticus 22 continues to speak to us across the centuries, prompting us to reflect on the nature of holiness, the power of ritual, and the ongoing human search for meaning and connection.
Section 1. Introduction. Time, Celebration, and the Sacred. For traditional societies, time is cyclical. It repeats and is sacred. It connects people to their ancestors and the divine. Festivals mark these cycles. They break the ordinary and bring people together. In ancient Israel, festivals were tied to the agricultural cycle. They celebrated harvest and acknowledged dependence on God. Passover, for example, commemorated the exodus from Egypt. These festivals were commanded by God and described in the Torah. They involved specific rituals, often with food, prayer, and storytelling. The Passover Seder uses food to retell the Exodus story. Each food has symbolic meaning. Understanding these festivals is key to understanding Jewish identity. They offer a window into the beliefs, values, and historical experiences that have shaped Judaism. They continue to be observed today, connecting Jews to their past and to each other. Festivals are expressions of joy, gratitude, and remembrance. Section 2, Passover, a night of liberation. Passover is a spring festival commemorating the Israelites' liberation from slavery in Egypt. The story is recounted in the book of Exodus. The Israelites, enslaved for generations, were freed by God. This freedom was marked by signs and wonders, culminating in the 10th plague. God passed over the houses of the Israelites, sparing their firstborn sons. This event is remembered in the Passover Seder. Families gather, eat a special meal, and retell the story of the Exodus. The Seder plate holds symbolic foods, each representing an aspect of the Exodus story. Bitter herbs symbolize the bitterness of slavery. Matzah, unleavened bread, represents the haste with which the Israelites fled Egypt. Today, Passover remains one of the most widely observed Jewish holidays. It is a time for families to connect, remember their history, and celebrate freedom. The Seder, with its rituals and storytelling, keeps the memory of the Exodus alive. It is a celebration of liberation and faith. Section 3, Unleavened Bread, Embracing Simplicity, Recalling Haste. The Feast of Unleavened Bread begins the day after Passover and lasts for 7 days. During this time, Jewish people eat matzah and avoid leavened bread. This practice commemorates the Exodus, when the Israelites left Egypt in haste. Eating matzah is a tangible reminder of the Exodus story. It connects contemporary Jews to their ancestors' experiences and God's deliverance. The simplicity of matzah symbolizes humility and reliance on God. In biblical times, the Feast of Unleavened Bread coincided with the barley harvest. This added another layer of meaning, as it was a time to thank God for the harvest. Today, the festival retains its core meaning, focusing on the themes of freedom, deliverance, and reliance on God. It is a time to remember the Exodus and reflect on its significance. The agricultural aspect is less prominent now. The festival continues to be observed by Jews worldwide. It is a celebration of faith and history. It is a reminder of God's provision and protection. Section 4, First Fruits, the Promise of New Beginnings. First Fruits was a festival of gratitude, celebrating the first harvest of the year. It took place 50 days after Passover, during the wheat harvest. The first sheaf of wheat was brought to the temple in Jerusalem and offered to God as a thanksgiving offering. This act acknowledged God's provision. The offering of the first fruits was a joyous occasion, accompanied by music and celebration. It was a time for the community to come together, thank God for the harvest, and celebrate the bounty of the land. The festival of first fruits also had a deeper, symbolic meaning. It represented the first fruits of one's labor and was a reminder that everything belongs to God. It was also a time to look forward to the future, as the first fruits were a promise of the harvest to come. While the temple in Jerusalem no longer stands, the concept of first fruits remains relevant. It is a reminder to be grateful for blessings and to dedicate the first fruits of one's labor to God. This dedication can take many forms, from charitable giving to acts of service. It is a celebration of faith and gratitude. It is a time to reflect on the blessings of life. Section 5, Shavuot, Torah, and the Gift of Revelation. Shavuot, also known as the Feast of Weeks, falls 50 days after Passover. It coincides with the biblical festival of first fruits. Shavuot celebrates the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, marking the covenant between God and the Israelites. The Torah contains God's laws and commandments and is the foundation of Jewish life. Shavuot is a time to celebrate this gift, study Torah, and reflect on its teachings. Traditionally, Shavuot is observed by staying up all night to study Torah, emphasizing the importance of engaging with sacred texts. Synagogues hold special services and the Book of Ruth is read aloud. Today, Shavuot remains a significant holiday, celebrating Jewish identity and tradition. It is a reminder of the ongoing covenant between God and the Jewish people. The festival emphasizes the importance of learning, reflection, and the ongoing pursuit of knowledge. It is a celebration of faith and wisdom. It is a time to connect with the teachings of the Torah. It is a reminder of the enduring bond between God and the Jewish people. Section 6, Rosh Hashanah, a time for reflection and renewal. Rosh Hashanah marks the beginning of the Jewish New Year. It is a solemn occasion for reflection, repentance, and renewal. The festival lasts for 2 days and falls on the 1st of Tishrei. Rosh Hashanah is considered the Day of Judgment, when God inscribes the fate of every person for the coming year. It is a time to take stock of one's actions and seek forgiveness for wrongdoings. One of the central rituals of Rosh Hashanah is the blowing of the shofar, a ram's horn trumpet. The sound of the shofar is meant to awaken the soul and call to repentance. It is a reminder of God's sovereignty. Rosh Hashanah is followed by 10 days of repentance known as the Days of Awe, culminating in Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. This period is a time for introspection, prayer, and making amends. It is a time to renew one's commitment to faith and righteousness. It is a celebration of new beginnings and spiritual renewal. It is a reminder of the importance of reflection and repentance. Section 7. Yom Kippur, Atonement and the Embrace of Forgiveness. Yom Kippur is the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, a day of atonement and seeking forgiveness for sins committed against God. It is also a time to seek reconciliation with others. Yom Kippur is observed with a complete fast and work is forbidden. It is a day for prayer and repentance. People wear white, symbolizing purity and a return to a state of spiritual cleanliness. Special services are held in synagogues throughout the day. One of the most important prayers recited is the Vidui, a confession of sins. The Alchet, a litany of transgressions, is also recited. These prayers emphasize the human tendency to err and the need for God's forgiveness. Yom Kippur concludes with the Ne'ilah service, a final opportunity to pray for forgiveness. The gates of heaven are said to close at the end of this service. The day ends with the blowing of the shofar, signaling the end of the fast and the hope for a year of blessing. It is a day of spiritual renewal and reconciliation. Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, begins 5 days after Yom Kippur. It is a joyous occasion and lasts for 7 days. Sukkot commemorates the Israelites' 40 years of wandering in the desert after the Exodus, serving as a reminder of God's protection and provision. During Sukkot, Jews build temporary shelters called sukkot, typically made of wood and covered with branches. Families eat their meals in the sukkah and some even sleep in it, to evoke the fragility of life in the desert. The sukkah serves as a visual reminder of the Israelites' reliance on God. It symbolizes vulnerability and dependence, yet it is also a place of joy and celebration. Families and friends gather in the sukkah, share meals, and rejoice in their blessings. Sukkot is a time to reflect on the themes of gratitude, impermanence, and the importance of community. It reminds us that even in the midst of uncertainty, there is always reason to celebrate life and give thanks for God's presence. Section 9, Shemini Atzeret and Simchat Torah, Embracing Joy and the Cycle of Torah. Shemini Atzeret and Simchat Torah are 2 holidays that follow Sukkot. Shemini Atzeret, meaning 8th day of assembly, is a separate holiday that immediately follows the 7 days of Sukkot. It is a day of solemn assembly and prayer. Simchat Torah, meaning rejoicing in the Torah, falls on the same day as Shemini Atzeret outside of Israel. It marks the completion of the annual cycle of Torah readings and the beginning of a new cycle. On Simchat Torah, the Torah scrolls are taken out of the ark and carried around the synagogue in a joyous procession. Congregants sing and dance with the Torah. The conclusion of the Torah reading cycle and the immediate beginning of a new cycle symbolizes the never-ending nature of Jewish learning. Simchat Torah is a reminder that the study of Torah is a lifelong journey. Section 10, Purim, Triumph over Adversity, a celebration of courage. Purim is a joyous and festive holiday commemorating the deliverance of the Jewish people from a plot to annihilate them in ancient Persia. The story is recounted in the book of Esther. Esther, a young Jewish woman who became the queen of Persia, her cousin Mordecai, and the Persian king Ahasuerus are the central figures in the Purim story. Haman, the king's advisor, plotted to exterminate the Jews. Mordecai discovered the plot and alerted Esther, who bravely intervened with the king. Haman's plot was foiled, and he was executed on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Purim is celebrated with feasting, merriment, and the exchange of gifts. It is customary to read the book of Esther aloud in synagogue. Costumes and masks are worn, with children especially enjoying the opportunity to dress up as characters from the Purim story. Purim is a celebration of courage, resilience, and the victory of good over evil. It is a reminder that even in the face of adversity, there is always hope. Section 11, Hanukkah, Dedication, Miracles, and the Light of Hope. Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights, commemorates the rededication of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. After the Maccabean Revolt, a successful Jewish uprising against the Seleucid Empire, the temple was desecrated. The Maccabees, led by Judah Maccabee, fought for religious freedom and reclaimed the temple. When the Maccabees sought to relight the temple's menorah, they found only enough pure oil to last for one day. Miraculously, the oil burned for 8 days. This miracle is celebrated during Hanukkah by lighting candles on a special 9-branched candelabrum called a Hanukkah. One candle is lit on the first night of Hanukkah, with an additional candle lit each night until all 8 candles are lit on the 8th night. The Hanukkah is placed in a window or doorway, symbolizing the public proclamation of the Hanukkah miracle. Hanukkah celebrates the triumph of light over darkness, purity over impurity, and spirit over matter. Section 12. Conclusion, Continuity and Change, Festivals as Living Bridges. The biblical festivals of the Jewish people are not mere historical relics, they are living traditions observed for centuries. They continue to hold deep meaning, connecting Jews to their past and shaping their present. These festivals have evolved and adapted to changing circumstances. The destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE led to significant changes. The sacrificial aspects of the festivals could no longer be observed, shifting the focus to prayer and communal gatherings. Despite these changes, the core meaning of the festivals remains. They continue to celebrate the relationship between God and the Jewish people. They mark the passage of time and offer opportunities for reflection, repentance, and rejoicing. They remind us of the importance of community, tradition, and the ongoing search for meaning in a changing world. These festivals are a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. They demonstrate the power of tradition to connect generations. They offer a glimpse into the rich tapestry of Jewish history, culture, and faith.
The sanctuary light, a symbol of God's presence. Leviticus 24 stands out as a chapter of rituals and laws, offering a glimpse into the sacred and the profane in ancient Israel. Nestled within the book of Leviticus, this chapter paints a vivid picture of the Israelites' relationship with the divine, emphasizing their obligations and the consequences of straying from them. The laws outlined here might seem archaic to modern readers, but they were central to maintaining order and holiness in ancient Israelite society. One of the key rituals detailed in Leviticus 24 is the maintenance of the sanctuary lamp. This lamp, fueled by pure olive oil, was to be kept burning continuously in the tabernacle, later in the temple in Jerusalem. The act of tending to the lamp wasn't merely a chore, it was a sacred duty entrusted to the priests, symbolizing God's constant presence among his people. The pure olive oil, meticulously prepared, represented a pure and holy offering to God, fueling a light that banished the darkness. The flickering flame served as a visual reminder of God's unwavering presence, a beacon of hope and guidance in a world often shrouded in uncertainty. This ritual underscores the importance of ritualistic devotion in maintaining a connection with the divine, a theme that resonates throughout religious history. The sanctuary lamp, in its simplicity, embodies the profound human desire to perceive the divine in the tangible world. The bread of presence, nourishing the covenant. Alongside the sanctuary lamp, another ritual described in Leviticus 24 involves the bread of presence. Every Sabbath, 12 freshly baked loaves of bread, representing the 12 tribes of Israel, were placed on a table within the sanctuary. This bread, also known as showbread, symbolized the ongoing covenant between God and the Israelites. It served as a reminder of God's provision and care for his chosen people. The act of baking and presenting the bread was a meticulous process, highlighting the sacredness of the offering. Only the finest flour and ingredients were used, signifying the Israelites' devotion and commitment to honoring God. The placement of the bread within the sanctuary, a space designated as holy and set apart, further emphasized the special relationship between God and the Israelites. Just as God provided manna in the wilderness, this bread represented sustenance and nourishment, but on a deeper level it represented the spiritual nourishment God provided. The consumption of this bread by the priests after its week-long display symbolized their communion with God and their role as intermediaries between God and the people. This ritual, like the tending of the sanctuary lamp, underscores the importance of physical acts of devotion in maintaining a spiritual connection with the divine. Blasphemy and justice, a harsh reminder. Leviticus 24 doesn't solely focus on rituals of worship, it also delves into the consequences of transgressing divine law. The chapter recounts the story of a man who blasphemed the name of God. This act, considered a grave offense in Israelite society, resulted in his being stoned to death, a stark illustration of the severity with which such transgressions were viewed. This account, jarring by today's standards, reflects the ancient world's understanding of blasphemy. In a society where the divine was intricately woven into the fabric of everyday life, insulting or cursing God was tantamount to a direct attack on the social and cosmic order. The punishment meted out, while harsh, aimed to uphold the sanctity of God's name and serve as a deterrent to others. This episode in Leviticus 24 serves as a stark reminder of the cultural and historical context in which these laws were established. While modern interpretations of justice and punishment might differ significantly, understanding the societal norms and beliefs of the time is crucial to comprehending the severity of the punishment. It also highlights the evolution of religious and legal thought over time. Ancient laws, modern reflections, finding relevance in Leviticus 24. Leviticus 24, with its detailed descriptions of rituals and laws, might seem far removed from the realities of modern life. However, upon closer examination, the chapter offers timeless insights into the human condition and our relationship with the divine. The rituals, though specific to a particular time and place, speak to the universal human need for connection with something larger than ourselves. The sanctuary lamp's perpetual flame, a symbol of God's unwavering presence, reminds us of the importance of seeking light in the darkness, of nurturing hope even in challenging times. The bread of presence, a symbol of God's provision, encourages us to recognize and appreciate the sustenance we receive, both physical and spiritual. The story of the blasphemer, while unsettling, prompts us to reflect on the power of words and the importance of respecting beliefs different from our own. While the punishment might seem disproportionate today, the underlying message of reverence and respect for the sacred remains relevant. Ultimately, Leviticus 24 challenges us to bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and modern sensibilities, to find meaning and relevance in these ancient practices and apply them to our lives today. Ancient cultures lived by rhythms. The cycles of the sun and moon, the changing seasons, the rhythms of planting and harvest, these shaped their lives. Embedded within these rhythms were practices, often rooted in spiritual beliefs that served to maintain balance. They understood intuitively what we often forget, that true prosperity comes not from relentless striving, but from respecting natural limits and prioritizing the well-being of the whole community. One such practice, found in the pages of Leviticus, offers a radical vision of rest, renewal, and social justice. The laws concerning the Sabbath year and the year of Jubilee, outlined in Leviticus 25, provide a fascinating glimpse into a society structured around principles of equity and sustainability. These ancient laws, often overlooked or misunderstood, hold surprising relevance for us today, challenging our modern notions of progress, ownership, and what it means to live in a just and compassionate society. The world of ancient Israel was vastly different from our own. Yet the human heart, with its capacity for greed, its longing for belonging, and its deep need for rest, remains unchanged. By delving into these ancient laws, we may rediscover timeless truths with the power to transform our lives and our world. Leviticus 25 stands out as a radical chapter in the Bible. It presents a vision of a society where land is not a commodity to be exploited, but a sacred gift, entrusted to humanity by God. It challenges us to rethink our relationship with the earth, with our possessions, and with one another. The chapter outlines two significant observances: the Sabbath year and the year of Jubilee. Every seventh year, the Israelites were commanded to observe a Sabbath year, a year of rest for the land. During this year, they were not to plant or harvest crops, but to allow the land to lie fallow. This practice served a practical purpose, allowing the soil to replenish itself. More importantly, it embodied a profound theological truth. The land ultimately belonged to God, and all living creatures deserved rest. Following 7 cycles of 7 years, the 50th year was designated as the Year of Jubilee. This year was a time of grand celebration and societal reset. Debts were forgiven, slaves were set free, and ancestral lands were returned to their original owners. The Jubilee was a powerful symbol of God's liberation and grace, a reminder that true freedom encompasses not just the individual, but the entire community. Imagine a year where the fields lay fallow, where the sound of the plough is replaced by the hum of bees and the air is filled with the scent of wildflowers. This was the reality of the Sabbath year. For the Israelites, this practice was more than just good agricultural sense. It was an act of obedience to God and a recognition of their dependence on the land. The Sabbath year served as a reminder that the earth is not ours to exploit, but a gift to be stewarded. It forced them to rely on God's provision and to trust that the land, given time to rest, would provide for their needs. This practice challenged their understanding of ownership, reminding them that they were merely tenants on God's land. The concept of a Sabbath year might seem impractical in our modern world, yet it speaks to the urgent need for sustainable practices that protect our environment and ensure the well-being of future generations. Perhaps it's time we rediscover the wisdom of resting the land, of consuming less, and of trusting in the rhythms of nature. The Year of Jubilee was a radical concept in the ancient world. It was a time when the societal order was temporarily suspended, and the gap between rich and poor was narrowed. Debts were cancelled, slaves were set free to return to their families, and land that had been sold out of necessity was returned to its original owners. This practice served as a powerful equalizer, preventing the concentration of wealth and land in the hands of a few. It ensured that everyone had a chance to start anew, to reclaim their dignity, and to participate fully in the life of the community. Jubilee was a testament to the belief that all people are created equal in the eyes of God and deserve to live with dignity and freedom. The Year of Jubilee was a time of great joy and celebration, a tangible expression of God's love for his people. It was a reminder that God hears the cries of the oppressed and is committed to their liberation. The concepts of Sabbath and Jubilee highlight the importance of rest, not just for the land but also for ourselves. In our fast-paced, achievement-oriented culture, rest is often seen as a luxury or even a sign of weakness. We push ourselves relentlessly, striving for more, achieving more, and accumulating more. Yet this relentless pursuit of more can leave us feeling empty, exhausted, and disconnected from ourselves, from others, and from God. The ancient Israelites understood that rest is not optional. It is essential for our physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. The Sabbath, a day of rest observed every week, was a gift, a time to cease from work, to reflect, to connect with loved ones, and to delight in God's creation. The Sabbath year and the Year of Jubilee took this concept further, reminding us that rest is not just about taking a break from work, but about creating space for renewal, for justice, and for the restoration of right relationships. Imagine a world without debt, where everyone has access to the resources they need to thrive. This was the radical vision of Jubilee. In the ancient world, debt was a major cause of poverty and social unrest. People were often forced to sell themselves or their children into slavery to pay off debts. The Year of Jubilee offered a way out of this cycle of poverty and oppression. By cancelling debts and returning land to its original owners, Jubilee created a more equitable society where everyone had the opportunity to flourish. This practice challenged the prevailing economic systems of the time, which often favoured the wealthy and powerful. Jubilee was a powerful reminder that true prosperity is not measured by individual wealth, but by the well-being of the entire community. The laws of Leviticus 25 challenge our modern concepts of ownership, particularly when it comes to land. In our world, land is often seen as a commodity to be bought, sold, and exploited for profit. We talk about owning land as if it's something we can truly possess. The Israelites, however, understood that the land ultimately belonged to God. They were merely stewards, entrusted with caring for the land and using its resources wisely. The year of Jubilee reinforced this understanding by ensuring that land remained within families and could not be permanently sold. This concept of land as a sacred trust has profound implications for how we live in the world today. It calls us to question our unsustainable practices of consumption, to prioritize environmental stewardship, and to recognize the rights of indigenous communities to their ancestral lands. Echoes of Jubilee modern movements inspired by ancient laws. The principles of Sabbath and Jubilee continue to resonate with people around the world, inspiring movements for social and economic justice. The civil rights movement, the labor movement, and the fight for debt relief all echo the themes of liberation and equality found in Leviticus 25. These movements recognize that true freedom encompasses not just political rights, but also economic justice, access to education, and the opportunity to live with dignity. They challenge systems of oppression and call for a more equitable distribution of resources. The spirit of Jubilee is also alive in organizations working to combat human trafficking, to promote fair trade practices, and to address the global debt crisis. These efforts demonstrate the enduring power of these ancient laws to inspire hope and to mobilize people towards a more just and compassionate world. Sustainability and Sabbath lessons for a world in crisis. The concept of the Sabbath year, with its emphasis on rest and renewal, offers valuable lessons for a world facing environmental crisis. Our current economic model, based on endless growth and consumption, is unsustainable. We are depleting our natural resources at an alarming rate, and the consequences of climate change are becoming increasingly dire. The Sabbath year reminds us of the importance of living within our means, of respecting the limits of the natural world, and of allowing the earth to rest and regenerate. It challenges us to rethink our relationship with the environment, to consume less, and to prioritize sustainability in all aspects of our lives. Perhaps it's time to rediscover the wisdom of Sabbath, not just as a day of rest, but as a guiding principle for how we live in the world. By embracing practices that promote sustainability, we can help to ensure a healthier and more just future for all. Social justice and Jubilee, a call for equity and compassion. The year of Jubilee stands as a powerful reminder that true justice requires more than just upholding laws. It demands a commitment to equity and compassion. In a world where the gap between rich and poor continues to widen, where millions struggle to make ends meet, and where systems of oppression persist, the principles of Jubilee feel more relevant than ever. Jubilee calls us to examine the systems and structures that perpetuate inequality, and to work towards creating a more just society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. It challenges us to confront our own biases, to stand in solidarity with the marginalized, and to use our voices and resources to advocate for change. The spirit of Jubilee invites us to imagine a world where everyone has access to healthcare, education, and economic opportunity. A world where debt does not cripple individuals and families, and where everyone has the chance to live a life of dignity and purpose. Conclusion: ancient wisdom for a modern world. The laws of Sabbath and Jubilee, found in the ancient text of Leviticus, may seem far removed from our modern world, yet they offer timeless wisdom that can guide us towards a more just, equitable, and sustainable future. They remind us that true prosperity comes not from relentless striving, but from respecting natural limits, caring for the earth, and prioritizing the well-being of all. These ancient laws challenge us to rethink our relationship with time, with our possessions, and with one another. They call us to embrace rest, to practice generosity, and to work toward the liberation of all people. In a world hungry for justice, peace, and healing, the principles of Sabbath and Jubilee offer a radical and hopeful vision for a better world. Leviticus 26 stands out. It's a powerful chapter, a tapestry woven with threads of blessings and curses. It speaks to us across millennia, reminding us of a fundamental truth: our choices have consequences. The ancient Israelites, poised to enter the Promised Land, received these words filled with promise and peril. Imagine standing at a crossroads, one path bathed in sunlight, the other shrouded in darkness. This is the image Leviticus 26 paints. The path of obedience leads to blessings. The path of disobedience leads to suffering. The power of Leviticus 26 lies in its directness. There is no ambiguity, no room for misinterpretation. The message is clear. Obey God's laws and experience His favor. Reject His ways and face His judgment. This message is as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago, speaking to the core of our human experience. Leviticus 26 is a divine blueprint for living, offering a roadmap to a life of blessing and fulfillment. It is a call to examine our lives, to align ourselves with His will, and to experience the fullness of His blessings. The heart of Leviticus 26 lies in the concept of covenant, a sacred agreement between God and His people. This covenant, established with Abraham and renewed with Moses, formed the bedrock of the Israelites' relationship with God. It was a two-way promise. God pledged to bless and protect His people, and in return, they were to obey His laws and live according to His ways. Obedience, in this context, wasn't merely about following rules. It was about cultivating a heart attuned to God's will, recognizing His sovereignty, and responding with gratitude and submission. When we cultivate a life of obedience, we create the conditions for God's blessings to flourish. These blessings were not merely material, they represented a state of wholeness and well-being, reflecting God's desire for His people to thrive. Leviticus 26 paints a vivid picture of blessing. It speaks of overflowing barns and fruit trees laden with abundance. It promises peace in the land and victory over enemies. However, these blessings are not mere material prosperity. They represent a deeper spiritual reality, a life lived in harmony with God. Imagine a land where the rains fall in their season, where crops flourish and the people prosper. This is the image of blessing painted in Leviticus 26. The abundance promised in Leviticus 26 is not a guarantee of an easy life, but a promise that God will be with His people through thick and thin. It is a reminder that faithfulness to God brings forth blessings that enrich every aspect of life. The Promised Land, flowing with milk and honey, served as a powerful symbol. It represented the tangible manifestation of God's blessings, a land of abundance where the Israelites could experience the fullness of God's provision. But this prosperity was conditional, hinging on their obedience to God's covenant. The prosperity promised in Leviticus 26 was not just about material wealth. It encompassed every aspect of life, from bountiful harvests and successful livestock to victory in battle and peace in the land. It represented a holistic well-being, a state of flourishing under God's favor. This concept of conditional prosperity challenged the Israelites to live in a way that honored God. Section 5, the crushing weight of disobedience. Leviticus 26 doesn't shy away from the consequences of disobedience. It lays bare the stark reality of turning away from God. The chapter outlines a series of escalating punishments, each one more severe than the last. These punishments serve as a sobering reminder, a reminder that rejecting God's ways leads to pain and suffering. Imagine a once fertile field, now parched and barren. Crops wither and die. The land, once abundant, now lies desolate. This is the image of disobedience painted in Leviticus 26. These punishments were not meant to be vindictive. They were acts of divine discipline, designed to bring the Israelites to a place of repentance. Section 6. Facing the consequences. Leviticus 26 doesn't merely list punishments. It describes the emotional and spiritual toll of disobedience. It speaks of fear and anxiety, of broken spirits and shattered dreams. It paints a picture of a people alienated from God, suffering the consequences of their choices. Imagine a city under siege, its walls crumbling, its people living in terror. This is the reality of disobedience, a life stripped of peace and security. The consequences of disobedience went beyond the physical. They cut to the core of the Israelites' identity. Their relationship with God fractured. They were left feeling lost and alone. Section 7, Divine Discipline and Mercy. Even in the midst of judgment, Leviticus 26 offers a glimmer of hope. It reminds us that God's discipline is never without purpose. It is always motivated by love. His desire is not to punish, but to restore, to draw his people back to himself. Imagine a shepherd seeking a lost sheep. He searches tirelessly until he finds it. Gently, he lifts it to safety. This is the heart of God. He disciplines those he loves. But his discipline is always tempered with mercy. Leviticus 26 reminds us that God's discipline is never the final word. Thousands of years have passed since the words of Leviticus 26 were first spoken, yet they retain a startling relevance. The themes of obedience, blessing, disobedience, and punishment resonate deeply with the human experience. They transcend time and culture, speaking to the core of our being. Imagine a compass, its needle always pointing north. Leviticus 26 serves as a moral compass, guiding us towards righteousness, warning us of the pitfalls of sin. The world today may seem vastly different from the ancient world of the Israelites, but the fundamental truths of Leviticus 26 remain unchanged. We still reap what we sow, our choices still have consequences. Obedience to God's principles still leads to blessing. How can we apply the teachings of Leviticus 26 to our modern lives? How can these ancient words speak to the complexities of the 21st century? The answer lies in recognizing the timeless principles embedded within this chapter, principles that transcend cultural and historical boundaries. Imagine a bridge connecting two distant shores. Leviticus 26 serves as this bridge, connecting the ancient world with the modern world. Its message of obedience and blessing, disobedience and consequence, resonates with the human experience, regardless of time or place. The principle of sowing and reaping, for instance, remains as relevant today as it was in ancient Israel. Our actions have consequences, whether in our personal lives, our communities, or on a global scale. When we sow seeds of kindness, compassion, and integrity, we reap a harvest of joy, peace, and fulfillment. Conversely, when we sow seeds of selfishness, greed, and hatred, we reap a harvest of pain, suffering, and destruction. Leviticus 26 invites us to engage in a process of moral reflection, to examine our lives in light of God's standards, to evaluate our actions and motivations. Are we living in alignment with His will, or have we strayed from His path? This process of self-examination can be uncomfortable, but it is essential for spiritual growth. Imagine a mirror reflecting our true image. Leviticus 26 serves as a moral mirror. It forces us to confront our flaws, to acknowledge our shortcomings, to recognize the areas where we have fallen short of God's glory. This self-reflection can be painful, but it is the first step towards transformation. The blessings and curses outlined in Leviticus 26 are not merely rewards and punishments. They are the natural consequences of our choices. Leviticus 26 presents a stark choice, a choice between faith and fear, obedience and disobedience, blessing and curse. The decision is ours. Will we trust in God's promises and walk in obedience, or will we succumb to fear and doubt, choosing our own way over His? Imagine standing at a crossroads, one path leading to life, the other to destruction. Leviticus 26 presents us with a similar choice. Will we choose the path of faith, trusting in God's guidance and provision, or will we succumb to fear, allowing doubt and uncertainty to dictate our course? Choosing faith over fear requires courage. It demands that we surrender our will to God's. Despite its warnings, Leviticus 26 ultimately offers a message of hope. It reminds us that God is faithful, even when we are not. His love for us is unwavering, His desire is for our good, and His promises are true. Even in the face of adversity, we can find hope in His steadfast love. Imagine a lighthouse guiding ships through a stormy sea. Leviticus 26 serves as a spiritual lighthouse, its message of hope piercing through the darkness of despair, reminding us that even in the midst of life's storms, God is faithful. The cycle of blessing and curse outlined in Leviticus 26 is not a closed loop. Even when the Israelites faced the consequences of their disobedience, God did not abandon them. He remained faithful to his covenant, offering them hope for restoration. This hope is rooted in God's character. He is a God of mercy and compassion.
Journey back with me to the world of ancient Israel. Imagine a time when laws weren't just about keeping order, but about something far more profound, maintaining a sacred connection with the divine. This is the world we enter when we crack open the book of Leviticus, the third of the 5 books of Moses that form the Torah, the bedrock of the Hebrew Bible. Nestled within this text, we find Leviticus 27. This chapter, often overlooked, offers a fascinating window into the religious and social customs of the Israelites. It outlines a system of valuations and dedications, a kind of sacred economy, governing how the Israelites interacted with their possessions, and even themselves in relation to their God. Leviticus the 27th of May seem at first glance like a dry list of rules and regulations. But look closer and you'll find a treasure trove of insights. These verses illuminate the values of a people striving to live in accordance with divine law, a law that touched every aspect of their existence. Leviticus 27 introduces us to a world where everything has a price, not in the material sense, but in its dedication to God. The chapter meticulously lists the valuations for individuals based on age and gender, reflecting the social structure of the time. Men, often the breadwinners, were valued higher. Children and the elderly, more dependent on others, had lower values assigned to them. Land, the source of livelihood and sustenance, also finds its place within this divine ledger. Its value was determined by its potential yield, highlighting the importance of agriculture in ancient Israel. Even animals, integral to their way of life, were categorized and valued according to their use and significance in Israelite society. This wasn't about commodifying life or reducing it to mere numbers. It was about recognizing the sacredness of all things. By assigning a value, the Israelites acknowledged that everything ultimately belonged to God. It was a way of consecrating their possessions and even themselves, a tangible expression of their devotion. One of the most challenging aspects of Leviticus 27 for modern readers is the concept of dedicating people to the temple. This practice, often misunderstood, wasn't about slavery or ownership in the modern sense. It was about individuals or families making a vow to God, offering a monetary equivalent for their service or commitment. This practice needs to be understood within its historical and cultural context. In ancient Israel, the temple wasn't just a place of worship, it was the heart of their social, economic, and political life. Dedicating oneself or a family member to the temple could signify a deep act of piety, a way of dedicating one's life to God's service. The redemption clause further complicates our understanding. Individuals could be redeemed by a family member paying the designated amount. This suggests that the dedication wasn't about permanent servitude, but a symbolic act of devotion, a way of acknowledging God's sovereignty over their lives. It's easy to get caught up in the details of valuations and miss the deeper spiritual message at the heart of Leviticus 27. These laws weren't just about economic transactions, they were about cultivating a mindset of gratitude and recognizing God's presence in every aspect of life. The act of valuation, even if it seems impersonal to us today, was a way for the Israelites to acknowledge the source of their blessings. It was a reminder that everything they had, from their land and livestock to their very lives, was a gift from God. This understanding fostered a sense of humility and dependence on the divine. Furthermore, the practice of dedication, even if only symbolic, served as a constant reminder of their commitment to God. It was a way of weaving their faith into the fabric of their daily lives, making every action, every transaction, an act of worship.